and welcome to CherrySTEM, part 2 of our Jordan Peterson show. This podcast is brought to you by, well, technically it's not a podcast, is it? This live stream is brought to you by us, Anna Cherry and Richard Rawl, as well as our wonderful patrons on patreon.com/Anna Cherry. These live streams, as well as the audio files of all the episodes, are free and available for everyone and always will be. So extra special thanks to our patrons for being extremely generous and helping provide you all with this awesome stuff. And hell, we really enjoy it too. So thanks again to our patrons. If you'd like to reap some of the rewards that we shower our lovely patrons with, we have Challenger tiers, what I would recommend. You see it right there on the screen in front of you if you do have a screen in front of you. If not, it is either beginner or challenger mode on patreon.com/Anna Cherry. I would highly recommend checking that out if you can. That'll give you, challenger mode will give you access to after show streams and other extra bonus content that we do with our patrons. And you'll make sure to, if you want to stay on the safe for work side, beginner and challenger tier are the ones. Every little bit of our Patreon help goes towards everything that we do, such as this live show. And I would really like to turn this into an actual podcast. Wouldn't it be so cool to hear us through Spotify or the iTunes or whatever? So we're currently building up towards a milestone to create a Libsyn hosting situation for CherrySTEM and actually get ourselves out there on the air where all the big boys and girls are. So if you can support us and you want to, please check out patreon.com/Anna Cherry. If you want to do safe for work, we have 2 tiers available in there, beginner and challenger. If you pledge challenger, you'll get after show CherrySTEM specific access. And then of course, hardcore and higher tiers are, well, hardcore. And you're more than welcome to check that out as well. So patreon.com/Anna Cherry. There's a lot of good stuff there. And of course, every single episode of CherrySTEM that we've ever done is on there in audio format. You can download them. There's also an RSS link in the description down below, I believe, that you should be able to use in a podcast player thing. I don't really know how RSS works, but from what I hear, you should be able to use that link. And it's a private RSS link, and you should be able to do whatever you guys do with RSS. So I'm pretty sure it updates you on our newest audio file updates that we post on Patreon, but I'm not sure. Don't take my word for it. Definitely check out all the posts because we have a lot of public stuff. You don't have to be a patron to benefit, but it's so much better if you do. So please, once again, patreon.com/Anna Cherry, and I will probably do a little less of shilling in the future, so we can get straight into the meat of things. So let's go ahead and do that. All right. I am joined by my lovely co-host, Richard Rawl. In spirit, in body, he is currently making us some delicious coffee, actually. So bless that man. Now, let me show you guys what we're talking about. So here we are. The paper, the article, not sure what to call it, but it's actually an academic paper. It is called 3 Forms of Meaning and the Management of Complexity by Jordan B. Peterson, and it is in the textbook of the Psychology of Meaning. Pretty sure it's an education book. Don't quote me on it, but the Psychology of Meaning, I'm fairly certain, is an academic text. And this 3 Forms of Meaning and Management of Complexity is a introductory, in fact, it's part 1, chapter 1 is right there in the beginning. It is a paper that introduces you to the concept of meaning in a very, very technical way. We're not talking about, the meaning of life or, a greater sense of meaning. It literally, like, how do we navigate the world? How does all of this work? And the really compelling thing of this conversation is not only to figure out how we humans work, because, this is very basic, sort of like really basic cognition, a stimulus response, just very sort of rudimentary level reaction and meaning in that sense. However, this is a really compelling topic to talk about in terms of AI and artificial intelligence development and robotics, in the sense of creating neural minds, like neural network thing that a facsimile of a human mind, because I mean that's the whole point, is that we've been trying to make robots to be like humans, and neural networks that teach themselves and learn and adapt is probably the closest that we've gotten to being human-like, but it's still not anywhere near being actually human-like. So the really interesting to me part about exploring this sort of introduction to meaning and the psychology of meaning is how we can apply this to AI and in general understand how just cognition works and how we make sense of the world and what conclusions we draw from it, etc. And I am finally joined by my lovely co-host. And I need to give you this article so that you can read it, because I believe you were...
I was the one doing the translation and dramatic reading.
Yes, I believe so.
Yes.
So let me pull it up on the side computer here. There it is. Lovely that I have... So last week's part one of this article, Hello? I was just about to say how lovely it is that I have this available for the public, because I'm not signed in to Patreon right now and I'm able to pull up this article, but it's not behaving. Great. All right, one second.
How lovely that it's not behaving and doing what you expected of it.
3 forms of meaning and the management of complexity.
We've got a washer going there in the background. I don't know if that's for the sound, but no, it's not showing up. Okay, that's good.
It's doing pretty good.
Noise gate. Yes.
I don't even know if this has a noise gate. It probably does. Yeah, it does. Okay, let me make sure the noise gate isn't too insane. 30? 30 is good. All right, we should be good.
All right.
Just in case. All right, here we go.
Now you made sure that they can hear the washer at all times, though, by doing that. I don't... Oh, okay, maybe not.
No, I increased the higher end, like the bigger number, because it's I don't really understand noise gate as well as I want to, but it has a open and close. Right. So the close I like to bring up to a higher decibel so that it doesn't. That's basically sometimes that happens when it cuts off my really loud orgasm, because it goes past a certain decibel, and that's the close. That's the cutoff. Okay. Right. So I like to keep my close very high, or Makes I guess sense. Low. A bigger number anyway. Yeah. So let me get to number page 7 there. So I pulled that up for you. All right. We're on page 7. At the top of page 7. So for all of those of you who are following along, the link to the article is in Patreon. So I'm gonna make you all go to Patreon, because that way you can follow us and keep on. Actually, yeah, you can do this thing on Patreon where you can just follow an account. You don't have to be like subscribed to it or anything. Let me add an HTTP. All you have to do is just be following it, and you actually get all public updates that any given account posts. So I actually really enjoy that opportunity that Patreon gives you all. So I would recommend following Anna Cherry on Patreon so that you guys get our public updates for CherrySTEM audio files. And that right there actually has a link as well. The latest, I just posted it today, and it has the original article link. So if you guys want to follow along, you can. But I am going to make you go to patreon.com/AnnaCherry just to, upsell. All right, so let's see. Jordan B. Peterson, page 7 at the top where it says...
Yeah, okay, well, I'm gonna do like a little rundown of what I remember. Sure. I mean, very little. Let's see.
It was just very basic introductory level stuff.
Well, no, I mean,
At first.
At first, yeah. I mean, he got into some interesting things, but the main point that he's trying to get at, I think, so far, is to like he starts out with the idea that our division of objects into what we call objects is really has to do with their utility to us as individuals,
based on a specific goal.
Right, and so he mapped that to some brain activity, in the hypothalamus, movement, and
The four basic F's: feeding, reproduction, fight, flight, reproduce.
right, the four F's.
The four F's, yes.
All right. As you were,
as I was taught by Kim Garrick, yes.
Yeah,
that's a joke I'm bringing y'all from second year neuroscience college.
Yep.
Yes, fight, flight, feeding, and fucking in hypothalamus controls. It's a very basic sort of.
I take it she skipped the fucking.
She called it a reproduction.
Right.
And it took me like half a minute to be like,
what?
4F? Okay. It took me a minute, actually.
All right, so map schema considered in their social hierarchical multiplicity.
Did we?
That's the top of page 7. What?
Right. Did we do a rundown? No, I wasn't sure. If we...
I'm telling you what I remember, and
okay.
so like he's been getting to three different types of meaning, and so
and we barely went over the first one, which is sort of like a
right.
very basic, like I want. Thing is there.
You know what we could do
to me
is we could go over this the final paragraph of the previous chapter because it's kind of going into a different chapter here. So I'm gonna because maybe that's sort of a summary, and so we're gonna read it and hope it's a summary. To identify some end as valuable means to grant it consummatory reward status, formerly as end implies consummation. Consummatory reward has well-defined, relevant, and oft instinctive features. The human capacity for abstraction means, however, that a hypothetical, arbitrary, or symbolic may come to function as consummatory reward. It may serve as a goal and indicate satiety, so that current behaviors can be terminated. May come to frame the perception of objects evaluated as incentives, threats, and punishments. So what he's saying there is that basically, but we identified these very particular things that you get food, you get dopamine. That's like the consummatory reward. And he's saying, well, only is that
once we start building civilization, we start using money. We start using secondary reward systems.
But also just concepts. In other words, I think it's not. It's actually before civilization. Okay. You need there's.
So like coming out of the cave. So from going from reptilian and primate to let's say.
No, I think it's actually going from reptilian to more primate, and even then that's too much of a simplification.
We have reptilian, mammalian, primate, and human.
But he's starting from like bacterial and like fungi,
the hydra,
exactly.
The sea worm.
And so what he's talking about really, there's conceptual. So when they're symbolic things. In other words,
okay, so we're going from a neural I don't want to call it neural network because I think, but we're going from a central nervous system, such as like the very basic C. elegans and other things, where all they have are just nerves. They don't even have a brain.
Right.
And then from there, we're going to the next level that has a brain and may start to think of the world in concepts.
And theoretically, I mean, because while this is somewhat fuzzy, like symbolic thought, theoretically, a lot of times people say, oh, well, humans didn't really have symbolic thought until we started doing cave drawings and shit like that, and that only happened about 100,000 years ago, whereas the human brain was fully developed 300,000 years ago. So what were we doing with our big brain that entire time without symbolic thought? And the thing is, I don't know that that's accurate that we didn't have symbolic thought. I think that
we have no records of it, or just because
no, I think that symbolic thought is
more than just drawings.
Is deeper, right? In other words, I think there's a fuzzy line. I think exactly what he's talking about here, where we put these arbitrary borders on things, they're not real borders; they're arbitrary. And I think that even your cat has, like, you can train them with a clicker, and so that becomes a symbol, though they're not consciously aware of it being a symbol.
But it is a symbol.
The click is a symbol for something else, and it does.
It is a consummatory reward that is next level.
Yeah, exactly. It's beyond the.
It's one level removed from the basic,
direct reward.
From direct reward.
The animal doesn't actually get the reward necessarily. Like after a while, the clicker becomes a reward, and you reward them by clicking and not by giving them a treat. And so it is actually rewarding in
the sense of a dopamine release.
So there is definitely symbol based, that kind of symbolism
in lower intelligence.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I agree with that.
But a lot of times whenever we're talking about it, when they say symbolic thought, they mean, where you're actually making these abstractions, and they think that that's where the cave art and all of that, that they call that like the dawn of symbolic thought. Not necessarily those terms, but it's referred to generally in that sort of way. All right, so map schema considered in their social hierarchical multiplicity. Basic motivations. Wait, did I read all of it? No, I didn't finish that. I didn't. I stopped halfway through that.
Because we.
Yeah, my fault. My bad. All right. Objects evaluated as incentives, threats, and punishments.
Such consequences of goal setting are universal.
Right. Such consequences of goal setting are universal, regardless of the specifics of the goal. This means, 1, that the cortex modulates archaic motivational systems by substituting abstractions for primordial goals. Right. 2, that goals may be considered generally as a class so that the diversity of potential goals can be ignored and the goal itself serve as an object of discussion. We establish point B, the ideal endpoint of our linear activity. We specify and evaluate a starting point A and our actions in reference to that ideal. So now he's going back to his whole postulation that you first say there's not enough of whatever, and then that drives you to go get and accomplish whatever. That was at the start of the paper. It's something I argued with. But perhaps that's because he's talking about the
simple ways.
Yeah, right. And that's we'll continue forward.
We'll get to his conclusion.
Right. We become anxiety-ridden or frustrated as a consequence of our failures, manifold and common. Alternatively, we embody a solution as a consequence of favorable mutation, or stumble across an answer, communicate our successes, and move up the dominance hierarchy. Our map schema solutions are inevitably evolutionary, phylogenetically, as our successful genes accumulate, and ontogenetically, as we try many useless approaches and conserve that work.
I like that.
Okay, so I think he may be hinting at, I'm not sure if I'm reading into this or not, but I think he's talking about the cultural...
if anyone would, he would.
Yeah, the cultural continuation of knowledge. In other words, where...
Oh, yeah, no, I love that. The phylogenetically and ontogenically, that's awesome.
Right, and
so accurate.
So even monkeys, like the 100th monkey effect is...
He mentioned it.
Oh, did he?
No, maybe
no, not in this paper.
Not in this paper.
No.
It was
so the 100th monkey effect, there's the magical idea of it. Ignore that. That it's like that it magically goes to other brains.
We talked about it when we were talking about collective unconscious. That's right.
Yeah, forget about that part. That interpretation, and
that's when we were
and I'm talking about the 100th monkey effect as the actual. There's something going on that is scientific.
Quorum sensing and proliferation of knowledge.
Exactly, quorum sensing, and that is basically there's a new habit. It takes a while for it to catch on because they have to. The group has to test it, whether or not it's valuable. Then once a certain number of the group has started to behave in that way, it is then captured as a valuable
by the entire group.
By the entire group. So there's some system in their brains that make sure to notice when there's a lot of other individuals doing X, a certain kind of percentage, that all of them then take it on as a new behavior. And so that is the dawn of culture. And that is that we, these habits and ideas and things like that get passed on to us as automatically valuable, and it doesn't require any conscious passing it along. It just happens because it's part of our mental systems as they evolved. And so I think he may be referring to that specifically. So all of our various failures and things like that are part of the evolutionary process, and so just pointing out that knowledge does grow in an evolutionary fashion. In other words, without planning, without really even understanding. It's just simply there is a evolutionary growth of knowledge and systems. All right, so your drink here.
Oh, yeah, no, I really like that last sentence where it's like basically, therefore, the logical assumption, or inevitably, these solutions are evolutionary, phylogenetic, and ontogenetic. So we have the genes, the memes, and the evolutionary sorting process that leads us to find that work the best within our system. So all
and
those
genetic
three
I don't know if he knew for him to have known the genetic memory was real at this point. I'm not sure that it was that very well. The tests were well known because there's experiments that now most people would know. But when he wrote this, the experiments that proved genetic memory actually happens may not have been around. 2013. Let's see.
Pretty sure that's the year that Psychology of Meaning was published.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, it might have just come out then.
Yeah.
He may.
They were both published in the same year.
So who knows? So who knows if he knew that?
The specific cherry blossom scent study, which there might have been ones before that they might have been aware of.
That one was very definitive
because he's a clinical psychologist. Right. That's he would know.
Yeah. Yeah. So who knows if he put that into this paper or not? So.
But it is the same year that both of this paper was included in a book that came out in 2013.
Yeah.
And
so if he made any alterations, I would say for them to come out the same year,
it's unlikely.
Right. Especially
unless he really had his nose to the ground for previous research that
All right. Status is the most important determinant of survival and reproductive success. So he should then say in a gregarious animal.
What? Our map schema solutions are inevitably, and then the next thing is map schema.
Oh, am I? Okay, I haven't finished drinking my coffee.
It's okay. We just finished page 6 and started page 7.
All right. Yes. But that was a good single sentence.
It was.
Right. So that's going to be part of what he says here. All right. Top of page 7.
Yes.
We can do this. I can do this.
I can help.
Yes.
You want me to read it, or you're just not going to follow it all?
No, I would not follow it in the slightest if you wrote it. All right.
Well, gee, thanks.
No, I have to read it. All right.
I understand.
So, basic motivations help solve the problem of pragmatic world simplification, but 3 basic problems still remain. Okay. First are issues of sequence and time frame. In what order should a set of map schemas manifest themselves over the day, or week, or year? Second is the related issue of importance. Which map schemas should be granted priority of value? Third is the even more complex and third problem, that of social being. How should I adjust my map schemas to those around me who are facing and trying to solve the same problems? It is identity, the idiosyncratic form of personal integration, that solve these problems. Such personal identity shades into the social, personal, and social identity.
Such personal identity shades into.
Yeah, that's weird.
Whatever that means.
Right. Personal integration.
Personal and social identity is emergent, unconscious, automatic consequence of the cooperative, competitive generation, sequencing, and rank ordering of map schemas. Such organization manifests itself intraphysically and socially as the dominance hierarchy.
Okay.
Don't know if I agree.
I completely disagree. So.
Okay, good. Let's talk about it.
Let me reread it to make sure.
Sure, yeah.
Such personal identity shades, let's say shades in the social instead of shades into.
It's like
well, what do you mean by shades into it? So that personal identity has impact on?
That it,
maybe that's what exactly. Maybe that's what it means. Personal and social identity is the emergent, unconscious, automatic consequence of the cooperative, competitive generation. Yeah, okay. Sequencing and rank ordering of map schemas. Okay, so that is
result of all of these.
Is the consequence of generation, sequencing, and rank ordering of map schemas. Such organization manifests itself intrapsychically and socially as the dominance hierarchy.
Oh, okay. I see.
Okay, so he's saying,
with it.
Yeah, a little bit more.
Yeah.
So he's saying that dominance hierarchy is what is the successful map schema shows itself. In other words, the way that.
Well, no, I mean, we're talking about individuality. So what he's trying to say is that genetically and ontogenetically, genetically and ontogenetically, through evolution, each person ends up being a unique conduit of everything that came before them, and that causes the dominance hierarchy. Because, like, how do we?
No, that doesn't. No? I don't think that's what he's saying.
Because he says.
No, what he's saying, I think, is that there's.
It is identity, the idiosyncratic form of personal integration that solves these problems.
And so what he's saying is identity. Individuals. That lead to individuals that are slightly different because of not just the various. Because he is basically kind of talking about mimetics, but he's talking about how there is a mix of genes and memes. And,
right, and that causes people to be
not using those words,
on different levels, on different hierarchy levels from each other.
But and then how that plays out becomes an emergent hierarchy that is situationally based, and that emergent hierarchy organizes. I think what he's saying is that the dominance hierarchy is a representation of the success of a given set of map schemas.
Because the question was, how do we get around the more complex third problem, that of social being? How should I adjust my map schemas to those around me who are facing and trying to solve the same problems? And the emergent property of trying to do that is dominance hierarchy. That arise through individuation.
No, what you're saying is that the dominance hierarchy is how you select, and I'm saying that how you select leads to.
No, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that. So third is the even more complex problem of social being. How should I adjust my map schemas to those around me? So how we do that is through individuals being more individually adapted to different things, and through there we have an emergence of dominance hierarchies because some people just naturally tend to be on top.
I don't think that's what he's saying.
Oh, what do you think?
It's so how should I adjust my map schema? He's saying how should I is very misleading because I think he's
how should people
how should an individual unit of this system adjust its map schema is a question, and how does that occur is part of the question, but I don't know that he's directly answering it very well. And that is he's saying that identity, the idiosyncratic form. Yes, exactly. So there is that, and it's so in other words, each one does have to fit in a certain position wherever they are, but then
it sounds like he's saying that dominance hierarchy arises
I think he's
as
done
an
at
emergent
that point.
Process.
Right. So it's personal integration. So an individual solves however they can integrate, but then I think he's done there at the end of that sentence, and then such personal identity. So now you have solved that issue. You have become an individual because of the way that you fit into your situation specifically.
Right. And the then resolution of those schemas by the individuals gives rise to the emergent property of hierarchies. Why do you not agree with that?
Say that again.
So
it's just you keep cutting me off, and I'm trying to finish a thought. So go ahead.
The way in which these individuals solve their map schemas in relation to others gives rise to dominance hierarchy.
Yes.
And you were saying that you disagree with that.
No, I was disagreeing with the subtlety of the way that you were putting it in the context.
That's what I basically feel like he's saying. He's saying that we are, at the end of the day, everybody is an individual, and the interaction between individuals allows for the solving of these complex problems,
right? And that's already done.
Gives rise to dominance hierarchy. That's why we have dominance hierarchies, because individuals are trying to
solve
their
specific
schemas,
right? And that So then, but then he's saying beyond that, such organization. Okay, the generation, sequencing, and rank ordering of map schemas.
I don't know what that is.
The rank ordering, in other words.
How does sequencing? What do you mean sequencing?
He's talking about.
What is sequencing?
He means like sequencing has to do with time. He was talking about earlier that when do you execute certain things?
Now in a year and a month.
So now what he's saying is that what is best. This is his way of saying what is the best map schema, how that is found by nature, period, not by individuals, but by nature. is that such organization manifests itself intrapsychically and socially as the dominance hierarchy. So what he's saying is that survival of the fittest meme ends up selecting for the best way of being. That is basically what he's saying there. I disagree that it is a not necessarily the best way. It is simply the way that works at the moment because of the situation. So it's a I suppose I'm arguing a subtlety here is that it is not always the best way. As a matter of fact, it often fails. It just so happens to be that is what appears to in the given situation, which is very, very specific. It has very there's the fact that you happen to have bananas around instead of oranges can change the way that what sort of dominance hierarchy exists because of the the way that the resources themselves work and how frequently they show up, and so everything is so
time,
right, exactly,
yield,
everything is so
yield.
closely integrated, which goes along with his overall what he's saying is that things are extremely integrated. We put these borders on things that aren't real borders, they're just useful borders.
Right.
And what I'm saying is that lack of borders is a crucial concept of understanding that things like the way that the dominance hierarchy itself plays out is dependent upon things as subtle as which resources are around, what the weather has been like. But all of these various things will determine which dominance hierarchy and which set of map schemas is the actual what's the game theory version of it? It's dominant strategy. Yes, right. All right. So then he goes on to say, status is the most important determinant of survival and reproductive success. So yes, absolutely.
That is true.
In a gregarious animal, he should have then said in a gregarious animal.
That's true because animals that are loners, they don't give a fuck. Whoever's nearby, who's strong enough to survive and kick the other dude's ass, sure, I'll reproduce with him.
Yeah. So, and why that's important is because socialization versus individual thought is something that is very, very important to whether or not you have a social brain or whether you have an inventor brain. And that's something I've been talking about.
We're talking about animals here.
Yeah, I'm talking about humans being animals also. We're talking, that's an arbitrary border. Yeah, in other words,
there's just so few animals that are inventors that it feels like a very...
No, in other words, there is a level of... Yeah, I know. Well, human beings... Okay.
Are the inventor animals.
Right. We're
start all over.
Yeah, why'd you interrupt me?
I must have missed something.
Okay. What I'm talking about is... So, what he's saying is the most important determinant of survival is reproductive success.
Why are we talking about suddenly we're ignoring... We're saying something that applies only in 1% of the cases, and while we're talking about
because it's of import. Because you don't talk about that status is the only, so therefore the social brain is all that fucking matters. That's basically the
to animals, which is what we're talking about.
No, it's not because I can tell you that there are innovations. All right, how did one of the monkeys in the 100th Monkey Effect start washing the fucking potatoes?
I don't know.
Because one of them was a fucking inventor. That's the point. One of them.
But it's a very limited thing because
no, it's not a limited thing. It is a crucial goddamn concept. I don't give a fuck. No, wrong. Moving right along.
I don't understand.
I know.
So I think that our viewers probably don't understand.
No, they completely understand that there has to be some level of where the only thing is your brain only paying attention to what the social thing is to do, or is your brain paying attention to how to manipulate the world instead of manipulate other individuals.
Talking about that, why are we narrowing our focus?
I'm not narrowing the fucking focus. I'm talking about something.
Why are you so wound up? Holy shit!
Oh God!
I don't understand. I'm not following the logic of why we would collapse our views narrowly into...
Okay, we've collapsed our view narrowly. Great. All right, moving right along. All right, status is the most important determinant of survival and reproductive success. This is his first line here. Establishment of a predictable dominance hierarchy allows for orderly resource access so that every consummatory attempt does not end in competitive violence. Like the competition that you were just now engaging in, where you were telling me that it was...
No, I just don't understand. I'm not following.
Okay. So I'm trying to point out what he's saying. Okay, he makes an absolute statement at the beginning of this paragraph.
Does he though?
Yes, he does.
Because the context is that we're talking about,
That's called
basic...
questioning me just now. In other words, you're saying that I'm wrong about what I'm saying. So is it that you don't know or that you're saying I'm wrong? Which one is it?
Well, my assumption was that his context is that we're starting with the very basic system. We haven't gotten to humans yet. So he would make an absolute statement that would fit a basic animal, and I don't see what's wrong with that, because his context is basic animals, not humans.
It doesn't fit a basic animal. I'm saying that it is important to, when you are talking about absolutes, it is absolutely crucial.
Maybe that's what it is. I just don't get what his context is. Talking about every human, like all of consciousness, like anything.
He says
anything with
one
a brain,
singular statement, starting right off. Status is the most important determinant of survival and reproductive success.
In what group?
That is not
in what
true.
System?
Okay, that is right.
For a lot of systems, it's really true. And
no, it's not, because
well,
if
for primates,
no, when primates are sometimes kicked out of the group. When they're kicked out of the group, they have no social hierarchy to rely upon.
Right.
They have to be able to exist on their own. Therefore, a different mental system is in place. Right. That is my point. That there are so yes, he's talking about
still most important.
No, they have no status. There are no other individuals around. Status doesn't have any impact on their survival. None whatsoever. Zero. They're out of the group.
And therefore, they don't reproduce, so they don't survive. Their genes
no,
don't
they
survive.
can then also, they have to have an additional methodology for thought. That is when they're an individual.
For thought.
Right, that's what we're talking about, is thought.
We're talking about achieving goals as a basic neural network.
Yeah, that is what leads to thought.
Right, but I'm not following how, if we're talking about basic primate,
let's establish it's not that you're not following, it's that you're saying I'm wrong. Okay, so
I don't understand. I have a specific set of assumptions that I am now questioning, because I'm like, what is he talking about? Is he talking about every level of human, from, a sea hydra, every level of mind, from like a worm that literally has 2 electrons to rub together, all the way to a genius human? Is he talking about absolutely everything and all of it in between? Or is he saying, this is about basic animals, now we're going to talk about higher level animals, and then soon later we're going to talk about humans, which is a completely different thing? Sure,
but I'm saying that it's not true at the animal level, just like I just demonstrated with the idea that individuals, meerkats, meerkats get kicked out of their group.
And then they die, and that's the whole point.
I guess that is actually a bad example.
I know,
that's a bad example. So earlier I just switched examples.
Any primate, once they get kicked out, they die. They
no,
don't reproduce.
Wrong. That's completely wrong. That's completely wrong. They actually do go to other groups. No, there's a time in between where they don't go instantly into another group. They have to exist as individuals for short periods of time.
What are we talking about? Are we talking about the outcome, or are we talking about what goes on in their heads, or what
We're talking about development of systems for dealing with situations. Okay. There are certain groups of programs. That's what he's talking about. Map schemas. He's basically relating it to programming. And so that you have all these various programs that interact and overlap with each other for dealing with situations.
Right.
Being an individual is a different situation than being part of a group.
Right, but status is still the most important.
No, there's no status when you're an individual. There aren't other people. Status is not what's going on.
But we're never really truly individual. We're all
no, when you're by yourself, you're not in a group. How are you not getting this?
And when you're by yourself, you have nobody to reproduce with, and then you die.
No, that's God. Okay, so then no thought goes on while they're they have zero ability to deal with anything at all. They instantly stop functioning the moment they're outside of a group.
No, we're talking about status
that's what I'm saying.
Most important determinant of survival and reproductive success. How is that a wrong statement?
Because they have to have a different method of survival when they're outside the group. How do you not follow that? When they're outside the group,
I'm just saying they don't have survival.
Then you're saying they instantly die the moment they're outside the group.
Eventually.
No, they don't instantly die.
Genes die.
No, they don't, because they can rejoin other groups. That happens all the time. They join other groups. Well, then don't argue with me if you don't know that.
I'm trying to get to information.
No, you're not. You're arguing. You're saying I'm wrong. There's a big difference, and you obviously don't know the difference.
All of my assumptions have always been, and what we've always talked about, has been that a gregarious animal getting kicked out of the group is a death sentence. Always.
Yes.
Period. We've never once qualified it. So that's always been end all and be all assumption.
Okay, but there's
Am I wrong? Is that wrong?
No, it's not wrong. It's a simplification of the fact
Okay.
that sometimes being kicked out doesn't last permanently. Okay, it's a simplification.
Well, I don't know that. We never talked about
It's just a high danger. I've
literally never encountered that concept in my life.
Okay, well, it's just because you hadn't thought it beyond that step. That happens, is that you don't think it out beyond that step.
Documentaries have never showed it to us. You never told me about it. How am I supposed to know that it's true if nobody told me that this is true?
Because there's a matter of
believing myself over.
No, it's just a matter of well, no, that's not over anything. That's simply thinking it out, continuing to think it out. That's all.
But if you don't have proof,
and
then
I'm
it's
looking.
just
Well,
schizophrenia.
yes, I've had a lot more experience with animals, and
yeah,
and,
I don't know.
Right.
So I need to be taught these things. So I've literally never encountered this concept before. So my working assumption has always
except
been
you
that
have encountered this assumption because I've talked about with humans, and that is what brought this up.
But he's not talking
Just
about
no, stop. No, you're just arguing with me for the sake of arguing at this point. Listen, don't talk.
Sir. Yes, sir.
All right. What I've told you about before is the fact that part of the reason why humans have a different methodology of thought, which is the inventor brain, than socialization.
Okay.
Social brain versus inventor brain.
Right.
Okay.
It has to do with autism and tools.
Right. And part of that is because individuals that end up on the outside of the group have to survive.
Sure,
and so you have to be more inventive. You have to be able to manipulate.
Still the most
no,
important.
it's not. Status is irrelevant once you're outside of the group.
But it is for But for percentage of the group, that what is the rule and what is the exception? Because he says
it becomes
most important determinant.
It's more of an exception in lower animals, and it's more of the rule in higher animals such as ourselves. In other words, there's a far more likelihood that an individual can survive on its own in humans than in chimps.
But also he's adding reproductive success to that, and I disagree with that. I feel like lower animals have a much higher reproductive success when they're individual, like cats, big cats, bears.
No, I'm talking about individuals that are part of
society,
gregarious animals. Don't bring into like completely. You just switched from. We're talking about gregarious animals only. Don't talk about ones that are
we're talking about
individuals.
gregarious only?
Yes, of course. That's why I said from the very beginning he needed to have said gregarious animals, because status is only matters, and that's why it's important to have brought that out, that it needs to be gregarious animals, because status is not the most important determinant of survival and reproductive success among individuals that don't have a status hierarchy.
That I've been painting a human society with too wide of a brush by assuming that status is the most likely and is the most important thing for reproductive success. I believe that in humans, status is the most important thing, period.
Okay, right now, here's the thing. When society gets huge, status becomes the way that you have success way over invention. That is, that I constantly talk about how invention is important when there's small groups, because that actually gives, they are actually rewarded. You're rewarded for invention. There's ability to, because all the individuals in a small group, exactly, the good you do comes back to you in small groups. But then when the group gets to a huge size, invention doesn't matter, because they can just copy your invention. And the invention doesn't need to be a specific tool. It can be a mental tool. It could be a behavior. It could be a new way of doing things that actually impact. Yeah, exactly. Life hacks, things like that. Those are inventions. And a social mind only has to copy. It doesn't have to understand at all, because understanding requires a depth and a breadth of information and integration of that information that is part of the inventor mindset, that is completely different from just copy and regurgitate. And then so here's the thing. So social minds copy and regurgitate tools, and therefore are capable of gaining the rewards of all of those systems without understanding them. Just like the monkey that first started washing the potato probably had a very different mind, okay?
And it probably lost a lot of potatoes trying to find the best way to do it too.
Right, not just that. And so it understood. So there
was
was some level of like it trying to, like it somehow noticed it didn't like the sand crunching on its teeth or something like that. Whereas all the other individuals that simply copied it they all gain the benefit without any of the experimentation, without any of the understanding, without any of those costs of spending time fucking with potatoes. Because during the time that inventor monkey was fucking with potatoes, the others were
reproducing, getting more potatoes.
Right, they were socializing.
Resources.
They were making sure they understood where everybody stood and jockeying for position in the social hierarchy. Okay, and so that's why this is crucial. This is a very crucial concept about humans. And that is that survival via the his first sentence.
So he's adding survival and reproductive success together, which
is
because complicating things. But
it's not that important.
The question is, would it still be fair to say that it is the rule that status is the most important determinant? And the exception is that there is another way, but the more
that's dependent upon the situation and the situation, including which animal. So let's say humans. Okay, humans in a small group under duress, social brain is fucking worthless garbage. Okay, when in a small group under duress, it is complete fucking worthless trash.
That's
social
like
brain.
You panic and you die, kind of thing. Like,
right, and well, not just that. You have to be able to invent. You have to be able to find a new way out. However, in a large group, even if it's under duress, a social brain is dominant. That will still, because they can still get, because the hive can overcome the individuals and power, and because there's still enough resources to feed upon as a parasite, as a top level parasite, where you're just simply, because you're dominant, because you're in control, you get more resources. The social brain is the winner. Okay, so yes, in that circumstance, the status is the most important determinant of social survival and reproductive success. However, so if you're outside of the group, you cannot depend upon the group. Say that you are a human being who is living anywhere in the wilderness. You're a human being living outside
but generally, we are humans that gather generally in
and
groups,
that is
and
so that is a mindset. We're talking about our position right now in the world, how the world exists today, and now we're not taking into consideration
all the hundreds of thousands of years that
hundreds of thousands of years that human beings have been around, and all the different ways in which we could possibly exist right now, and how our situations could rapidly change, and and how those situations end up playing out. So this is a crucial subject matter, which is why I deviated in the first place upon that statement, to make sure to clarify it. So okay, so the point is, from his first statement, and then he continues to talk about.
So what you're saying is that the whole thing about borders, we actually need more borders when it comes to that statement, because that statement is too.
And he may eventually get to it, but yes, it is that statement is far too absolute.
So broad that it's inaccurate.
Right, it's so broad it's inaccurate. He may eventually get to it, and that's why I just wanted to quickly say no, that's not quite right. And say why in a short form, and didn't want to go on this long of a
but it was
thing.
Really important. I learned stuff.
Yeah, okay. Well, you learn through controversy, yes.
Hey, hopefully it got us some more views.
Yes, because I know the entire time I was thinking about, it's like, people like drama and shit like that. That was actually going on. It's like there's that primate part of us that likes that kind of bullshit, and so sure, this will be great for the views. All right, so establishment of a predictable dominance hierarchy allows for orderly resource access so that every consummatory attempt does not end in competitive violence. So the point here is that there are systems that are determined by the group's success, I think is what he's getting at here. So in other words, because what he just identified is not something that necessarily directly benefits any given individual. It benefits the group to not constantly break out.
Like technology?
What would be an example of that? Having a very hierarchical society. Why is it that we have a drive towards hierarchical societies? Like when you take like feudal Japan or something, where something you think of as...
I don't know, but even lobsters have a drive for hierarchical society.
Right. So why do you have a hierarchical society? Because otherwise war breaks out. And so this actually comes down to, why is it that you even have, why do you have hierarchy at a business? Why do you have hierarchy anywhere? Because otherwise competition always gets in the way of a smooth flow of, you cannot exist as a larger unit if there is interpersonal, if there are inter-unit competitions. In other words, like when you try to make something a collective, the internals of that collective must actually work together without competition.
And what's the most hierarchical structure that we know? The military.
Right, and that's the
that's why.
Yeah,
because you need it.
Yeah, because it won't fucking work otherwise.
Right.
If you don't actually have a hierarchy, it just won't fucking work. Now that hierarchy may end up being wrong sometimes. It may go wrong. It may need to be reorganized, and that definitely is true. There's a
systems are terrible. Systems are necessary.
And that's why there's the Kuhnian revolution in systems. In other words, Kuhn's idea of what's it called, the structure of scientific revolutions. He identified a cycle, and that cycle is actually relevant. And I don't know why nobody talks about this, but that cycle is relevant for all complex systems. They have to be reorganized. They have to hit a revolution point, otherwise they become stagnant and fail. All right, so
question: what would you propose as a more important determinant of success in social animals? The existence of survival traits for solitary life doesn't imply their greater importance.
Say, do that again.
What would you propose as a more important determinant of success in social animals rather than status? The existence of survival traits for solitary life doesn't imply their greater importance.
They are only of greater importance when they are in solitary. That's the thing. They are. It's
situation dependent.
It's situation dependent, which is the whole point he's trying to get at too. Is that he's saying that it is emergent. In other words, what is valuable is determined by the situation. It is valuable to
hence
be
the arbitrary border that we put on it.
Right.
He started off with this.
Right, exactly. It is determined by the situation, and so
by the specific goal, even.
Right. So that's why, for the most part, the other animals haven't developed human-like behaviors of inventiveness. Is because it is the ability to be inventive is, yes, eventually you're one thing that you're trying to say about it being an exception versus the rule is. It is true. Yes, I mean it is true that it is. Matter of fact, just the development of our ability to be inventive at all is an exception in nature, and so it is. I mean that's why we're the only ones that are doing the shit that we're doing. It's because human beings are a fucking exception over millions and millions of species and billions of years. We are an exception.
We're doing something different,
right? And so yes, but the point is that it is determined by situation, and so the thing that he's saying that is the most determinant of survival and reproductive success is only true when individuals are not put outside of the group, but when there are individuals put outside of the group, then it becomes a crucial part, which is why I was bringing it up, is because it is important to understand why human beings developed what they did. That's why I wanted to bring that up.
And that's what I missed too, is that at the root of it, we're talking about map schemas. We're talking about thought processes. We're talking, and so you brought up a really important point that it's not about just the outcome. It's about what goes on inside the brain to adapt to a group, and then how would that have to change to a different map schema to adapt to individual life.
And the truth of the matter is, most human beings today are relying upon a social mind. That is that there's no need to understand the way the world works. All you need to do is copy others. Because and keep in mind what he pointed out there is that what's underneath the surface of what he's saying is that such organization manifests itself intrapsychically and socially as the dominance hierarchy. He's saying that the best way of being is exhibited by the most dominant human. So therefore, by extension, this means that whoever is on the top in humans is the best way of being. Period.
Big goof on that one.
Yeah, exactly. So the truth of the matter is, all of us should be just like the oligarchy. All of us should be sociopaths. And the truth of the matter is, no, the system doesn't work if everybody's the same. First off,
right?
And so, which that's the part that is problematic here that I was eventually going to get to.
The one thing we do so far disagree with him on,
right? And that is so therefore there are various different sets of map schemas that are important for specific individuals. But then also the
the situations the individuals find themselves in.
Right, and so it's good for that individual. It is not necessarily good for all of them, and is definitely not saying the ones at the top are actually the best. That is absolutely not true.
It just happens to function at the moment.
Yeah.
I'll give
Well,
you
it
that.
also functions for their situation, which is
Right.
the
At
the
that
position
moment,
they have, which is they happen to have all of these. It is, yes, it is best for an individual who has lots of money, for instance. You're born into money, to act like a piece of shit. Okay, in other words, like being self-centered and like, oh, everything's not good enough, that signals to others that you have lots of resources. That's how one primate who can't think out the ideas of resources and availability of resources and things like that knows that another primate is of higher status.
Based
Is
on
that
how,
they're
if they scoff at a slightly brown banana,
right,
that
exactly.
means they got a riper one at home, or
Right.
less ripe.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. How dissatisfied they are, how they treat others in a shitty fashion because they don't have to worry about their hierarchy. They don't have to worry about being in danger. They don't have to worry about, and that's how you know. And so therefore the behaviors of somebody born into status is a completely different set of behaviors than someone who is not born into status, and it is best for the one who's born into status and very bad for ones who are not born into status. So one that is born at a lower status can't be scoffing at every little banana, and can't be paying no attention to
death sentence.
Right, exactly. So it is completely an emergent qualifier whether or not a given set of behaviors is good. So there is no absolute best system here. There are a bunch of systems that have to adapt to situations, which is why there's so much complexity. Right. Everything has to adapt to these so many different situations, and so that's why I was talking about this. Is that it sounds like when you start talking about, it's like, this is the exception. Well, they're all exceptions. In other words, there's so many different ways of being that they're all kind of exceptions. And so it's only because we say the socialization. Well, socialization itself can be broken up into many, many different things. And so, yes, focusing on who's got the bananas, who's who's powerful, who is on the outs, so who will give me an opportunity to rise in the hierarchy, who is all of these things that have to do with the social brain. Yes, they are absolutely critical to survival and reproduction inside of a gregarious set of animals, and that is the single biggest determinant when you are inside the group. However, it is being outside of the group that makes for an inventor's mind being highly superior, because the moment that those individuals are on the outside of the group, it is instantaneously a death sentence if they do not have the ability to be an inventor and adapt to new situations. That is absolutely true, and that is part of what I've been talking about the entire time. So most individuals conform to the socializer mindset. That's why Asperger's and autism is a very rare occurrence, because that is a situation that should only crop up and is only valuable when you're outside of the group, and you're supposed to be inside the group most of the time. But those individuals who do not have a capacity for the invention and understanding of and therefore adaptation, those who do not possess that, the moment they are outside of the group, it is basically a death sentence. They're not going to fucking survive at all. However, those who do have a capacity for it, who can switch into a different mindset, then that becomes the dominant mindset. They have to adapt when they're on the outside. They have to then switch gears into a different set of map schemas, and therefore having them, and then it is the dominant way of being once they're on the outside. Those other behaviors that have to do with surviving and being successful in a group are worthless trash at that moment. And they're also worthless trash when the group itself is under extreme duress, and the group itself, a small group, is going to be eliminated. All their socialization shit is basically worthless, and only those who are the inventors and who can create a new way of being for that group, who can go find new resources, who can change the way in which they're no longer just going to weave baskets and depend upon their placement in the group. They're going to do something else entirely. Those are the individuals that make the group survive. Those are the reason that groups do survive. And having to have that exception that the ability to handle exception handling, that's one of the biggest reasons why simplistic programming fails, is because it doesn't deal with exception handling properly. Exception handling is one of the biggest problems that you have in programming. It's one of the most tedious things that you try because it becomes nearly infinite when you start trying to, as a programmer, that's one of the things that you do is try to kind of force things down a given path, because when you simplify things, you can handle the borders that you try to make sure there's only these borders that the user can act within, because once you start actually dealing with exceptions, it can become infinite. And so there is a trying to eliminate all those various things. However, nature can't just always have things within borders, because reality just doesn't fucking work that way. And so it does have to have this, and that's why it has emergence as a basic principle. It's a basic design principle. And that's part of the reason why old attempts at AI sucked, and they're fucking horrible, is because we were doing it in our way, which is to oversimplify, whereas to make it work in a way that you have to have emergence as a base principle, the way that you end up developing things. It has to be able to come about because of its interaction with the situation. So let's go back to what we're let's go back to the paper.
I would even add that inventiveness can be seen, not like you were saying earlier, it's not just like creating a new widget. It could even be, just a new way of thinking. And to bring this into the modern day, if anything, it seems like this adaptability that we're talking about, in fact, being an individual might be an even more important survival and reproductive metric, because of the social tensions that currently are happening. Like, people are constantly getting kicked out of groups. Like, they're constantly having to switch between social individual because of current climate, the modern world. I feel like, a divorce, you get kicked out of a whole family. Just
exactly.
Little things like that, where I feel like it's even more actually prominent in this day and age to talk about the fact that exception of not looking at status as the most important determinant, but in fact having an individual thing is actually more important, because of how chaotic and fluid our stuff is between groups and individuals these days.
Okay, so but he does have a point of why it is as a rule status.
Right.
So if he said as a rule and gregarious animal,
right.
And then this would
give us 2 more qualifiers and we're good.
And then it's good. Yes. So establishment of predictable dominance hierarchy allows for order with the more complex events, but basically it is to make sure the reason why you have hierarchy in a group is to make sure that there is some level of order, so that the group can act as a group instead of breaking into constant war. So therefore, what he's hinting at here is that social hierarchy itself plays a very important role, and that when you don't have any kind of established hierarchy at all whatsoever, you constantly have competition between individuals, and that we can see this is true. And it doesn't have to be a direct, a physical violence. It can be psychic violence. Yes, psychological violence. So, all right. Or at least, competition, which is very disruptive. It's just extremely disruptive, and you don't accomplish, if you're busy competing, you don't accomplish the group's goal. You don't get the group's goal done.
If you're busy competing, you're not cooperating.
And we actually gave a great demonstration of that earlier.
No, I was just trying to understand.
No, you weren't. You were contradicting me. All right, so let's. Okay, so status tracking is so important that group and neocortical size are tightly correlated among primates, and the advancement worth fighting for. Okay, so juvenile chimps, our close cousins, share many map schema with children, including those related to dominance hierarchy maneuvering. These manifest themselves first, innocently enough, as teasing. Teasing becomes more serious with age, but less frequent. The infant engages in little pushes from behind, jumping away when dominant peers, and eventually higher ranking.
No. The infant engages in little pushes from behind, jumping away when the adult reacts.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I moved the computer. I was trying to
readjust myself. The adolescent male
here.
Manifests full-fledged charging displays, seeking to dominate peers, and eventually higher-seeking adults. Higher ranking. Not higher-seeking.
Yeah, I would have noticed the problem.
Okay. But it does really go well. Like, it does go well together.
Yes. All right. Thank you for the demonstration. All right, so adults form sophisticated coalitions jockeying for position. Such jockeying become horrifically violent. The fact of innate dominant striving, however, buttressed by aggression, does not mean that chimps or humans lack social feeling, or that they simply come to inhibit their aggression through fear or forethought. Primates are gregarious, much as aggressive, even in the aftermath of violent encounters. Okay, so he's trying to point out that it's that there is still a general being together of the group even after violence, and so in other words, it's they may fight, but there's still an overall cohesion of the group. I think is what he's trying to bring out there. Agnostic and cooperative behaviors are not simply opposed to one another. Agnostic and cooperative.
Yeah, that's such a strange use of
what the fuck. Not knowing and cooperative behaviors. That makes no sense at all. He must have meant aggressive and he got autocorrected. It must have been aggressive and misspelled and then autocorrected.
Well,
aggressive and cooperative. Because if it meant, I think that's got to be what it is. Because agnostic just does not go there.
Makes no sense.
More aggressive social creatures may have to be more affiliative. Period. That is
agonistic.
Ah, you're right. There we go. Agonistic. Oh my god.
That makes so much more sense.
Oh god.
I never heard that word used that way though. You hear antagonistic so much more frequently than agonist.
Agonistic?
What is that?
Yeah, that is. Who the fuck uses that? Okay.
Causes them great agony. It's very agonistic.
Agonistic. All right.
What a weird word.
Well, agonism, especially him, because in agonism is activation of a receptor.
Right.
So it's like you're using agonistic, and it's just terrible. Okay. Interaction can be cooperative at one level and competitive at another. The dominance hierarchy is, in fact, a form of extended cooperation, establishing the frame for within hierarchy striving, and aggression is counterbalanced by two powerful regulatory processes. One is innate and internal, the other emergent and social. The internal process is empathy, the ability to feel another's experiences. The maternal circuitry governing empathy is deeply rooted and modulates response to those deemed kin. He's using so much of he's making such just direct statements instead of having a flowing conversation here. So he's saying the internal part is governed by empathy. And so therefore that's what's holding groups together. And that's what establishes the okay, so I think something we talked about in the earlier podcast was that there is a scale-based hierarchy, in that at one scale a behavior is destructive, and at another scale it is constructive, and that and that's why you've got these oppositional sets of behaviors where it's good. What's good for the group is sometimes bad for the individual, and vice versa, depending on time scales and things like that. And so I think he's kind of trying to bring that out, that there's these multiple scales, and that that there is this opposition that's kind of brought out. I think that's what he's trying to bring out here. All right, moving along, because he doesn't give any verbiage around it. He's just making declarative statements,
right.
Which is really not very good. All right. Chimps are predatory. They hunt monkeys and raid foreign conspecifics. A chimp might even maim or kill a troop mate during intensely agonistic dispute. Let's say antagonistic instead of agonistic. That's weird.
Agonistic definition of relating to or being aggressive or defensive social interactions, fighting between individuals usually of the same. Seems to be a jargon word in a particular field.
All right. Okay. Field jargon. Got it. Makes sense. All right. So it's just field jargon. Yeah. Clearly, there is no inevitable internal limit on their aggressive map schemas. Inevitable internal limit.
Like, at what point do you stop? what he means?
It seems like it. They even might maim or kill a troop mate during intensely agonistic disputes. So the point is that when there's enough of a dispute, even amongst the troop, it may end in death. So there's no internal limit on aggressive map schemas. DeWall has suggested instead that it is the whole troop that constrains the ambitious individual becoming agitated in mass when any battle goes too far. So in other words, it is the group that limits individual, basically
it's not an internal thing. It's
right. So basically, within chimps, there's no internal moral compass necessarily. Mm-hmm. It is constrained by the group.
So
So the law of the group is what keeps individuals from continually trying to move upward
by killing of their own.
Right, by killing all those around. I don't agree. I think there is that a lot of them have an internal because because the group cannot always. Because then all they have to do is just murder in secret.
Altruism is baked into every group.
Right, and so I completely disagree that they have no internal moral compass. But I think there's
maybe it's chimps specifically.
I think that because they could just take an individual off and they would develop secretive killing at that point.
Why would you not? If you could eliminate your competitors.
Right, and then who knows why they died? Oh, no, it's not like they've got fucking investigators among chimp groups.
Not that they have DNA evidence.
Right, they don't have DNA evidence for who murdered them, so they just they just murder people off to the side, and so that I think there definitely is an internal limit. It's just it's sometimes overcome by situations. It is situationally emergent that there are times that there is exceptions where the individual of a troop will murder one of its troop mates.
Feels like it's still rooted in sociality though.
Oh yeah,
like it's still some sort of like quorum sensing. Like how mad are people gonna be
if I
this time?
Right, if I kill this motherfucker. Right. So I think that there are probably individuals that have internal moral compasses that are stronger than those that do not. I mean, I think there's definitely a level of various levels because they're going to have different map schemas. I think certain individuals are going to have more of a limit than others.
Right.
And so I don't understand why they would say that there's not a limit amongst the whole group because some individuals.
Literally 2 paragraphs ago, he said that individuality or individuals is how all these complex issues are solved.
Right, so and then it's like, and then judging that the whole group doesn't have. I think that there are definitely individuals who are basically sociopaths among the primates as well, right. and they'll continue to keep climbing, and yes, those individuals have to be constrained by the group, otherwise they will just keep murdering and keep trying to raise in the social hierarchy.
Well, the question is that's brought up, do you need to display publicly your social dominance over someone? How can you rise in social dominance if it's a
because there's a vacuum. There's a vacuum of power. If the person above you, if you automatically become.
Well, it's a hierarchy. So
right.
Whoever's on the bottom moves up. Whoever's the vice president becomes the president.
Exactly. You kill everybody above you, and now you're at the top. It's just.
And everyone below you will continue staying there.
Right. And
unless you get killed.
Right, unless they kill you, which is, of course, why you don't have everybody killing each other, because it would end up being a constant warfare. And which is part of what he was saying before. It's like, and so there is disruption of the hierarchy, and disruption of the hierarchy absolutely does occur. Mm-hmm. And there will always be development of behaviors that are parasitic. In other words, that is basically killing other individuals is a parasitic behavior, and parasitism will always be attempting to tear apart groups. Mm-hmm. There will always be different varieties of parasitism that will arise and be tested, and the group will be tested. And if it fails under the parasitism, well, then the group itself eventually dies and goes away.
So it needs to develop. Groups need to develop.
Groups have to have immune systems. Yeah. Groups have immune systems. They have mimetic immune systems, and that's why I like to call it memes, because groups and their map hierarchies that he's talking about, those things actually work together. They all work together as a larger system. Exactly. There is a larger interworking system that is crucial. And so not just the individual systems, but the group of systems and the way that those systems interact with each other is itself another layer. And that is a collection that has to work together properly. Okay, so let's continue forward on the paper. The paper. Chimps are predatory. They hunt monkeys and raid foreign conspecifics. Okay, no, that's where I already read that. Suggest instead the whole troop can. Okay, De Wall has suggested instead that it is the whole troop that constrains the ambitious individual, becoming agitated in mass when any battle goes too far. Yes, so there are certain individuals that are overly ambitious. Basically, they are the attempt at parasitism that has emerged, and it has to be constrained by the group. Thus, a well socialized individual may not generally need a superego. Okay, so they're saying that superego is a development, and so if an individual is very subservient to the group, in other words, they're very large, then you don't necessarily need a superego. In other words, any kind of self-regulation doesn't necessarily need to happen. I disagree. I think that there is, well, okay, calling it a superego does make it complicated. Because I think there is self-limiting moral behaviors within the genetic profile of behaviors that are determined kind of beforehand, somewhat determined beforehand, and so there is there is some level of self-limitation. But yes, it seems as though amongst animals there's not as much self-limitation as amongst humans. However, there's tons and tons of examples of self-limitation and putting off instant gratification amongst various animals.
Certain
everything
species.
Yeah, various especially species with
dolphins, corvids,
right, dolphins, corvids. There's a bunch of
probably
different,
elephants.
yeah, and almost certainly other primates. So I don't know about that. If he is acceptable to his peers, the modulating effect of their reactions will remain at hand and effective. Not if he goes and murders them in secret. When human children are socialized, they learn socialized alternatives to violence, which serve as more effective means to social status. They do not simply inhibit the primal aggressive circuits. Instead, they integrate these circuits into more sophisticated behavioral games. Yeah, exactly, social games. The child organizes her primary impulses into a higher order, low resolution map schema within the confines of the dominance hierarchies she inhabits. Absolutely. So basically what they're talking about is instead of direct aggression, everything starts to be done through what's the other word? Yeah. No, and what do they call it when you're damn, I can't think of the word.
What do they call it
when you're being an asshole to people and you make sure that they don't that nobody can call you? Yes, passive aggression. Thank you.
Yeah.
When you're being an asshole and you to make sure that nobody can call you on being an asshole. That's passive aggression. So yes. So what they're saying is humans developed passive aggression to as a way to do things. It's basically secret aggression. And he doesn't say that specifically, but that I think is what he's referring to. Such organization is mediated by empathy and then by play. Play is early social cognition. When children play, they adapt their actions to each other. They produce and then share a perspective and work towards a common goal. That's weird to say, since a lot of times they're working towards entirely different goals. That is strange.
Maybe Canadian kids are more cooperative, but
I don't know what the hell he's talking about here. That doesn't make any sense. They produce and then share perspective and work towards a common goal.
Maybe when they're playing games like Red Rover.
Okay, maybe when they're playing cooperative games.
Like Duck Duck Goose.
He's not talking about the social gaming. He's talking about just actual children's games.
Humaning.
Right.
Yeah.
Children. No, literally children's games.
Right.
Okay, as that symbol typically means, not when we're talking about social interaction sorts of things. They embody the same map schema to the benefit of both. The capacity to do so unfolds developmentally, starting with the body, in direct physical contact with others' bodies. The maturing child begins by constructing small-scale motor patterns designed to attain individually motivated ends. Play is purely individual at this stage. Ritualized schemas develop skilled play habits, but no cognitive patterns, much less rules. What?
No collective patterns.
Oh, yes. Piaget. Okay. The children The child plays alone, practicing a repertoire of functional actions and conceptions from the spinal bottom of Swanson's control hierarchy to the cortical top. Plays alone, practicing a repertoire of functional actions and conceptions. Okay, so what they're saying is basically a child is playing a scientist with social, and they're basically kind of trying out social interaction schemes to see what works.
He's talking about motor skill. He's talking about just purely physical stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Which, is way they did mention that infants do the pushing thing and that they do physically interact with each other in a teasing, dominancy, hierarchy seeking way.
Before there are statable rules, there are behavioral patterns. Absolutely, yes. So what he's saying is that the rules are something that they kind of figure out. They get their own sense of, oh, these are the rules of the world, and without anybody telling them, these are the rules of the world.
We do have a question, or a repeat question from chat. That they're having an issue with your murder in secret theory. That for a chimp, murder in secret is super dangerous. There's a large chance the victim turns the tables, thus lots of risks for little reward because the chimp only moves up over that one chimp.
Yeah, well, of course, there's always competitive pressures between like risk versus reward.
Well, it seems like you'd try to find any advantage you could.
Right, and that's the same reason why we have sociopaths who murder in humans as well. As a lot of times it has to do.
And we have mass shooters too. There's those who want to show a public dominance display, and then there's those who fucking just do it in secret.
But the point is that that these behaviors are there is a risk versus reward, absolutely, and so but that is not.
That doesn't discount the value of the strategy.
Right, and also there's not a consideration of risk that really happens with chimps and even with humans. That's why punishment is not a very good system of limiting people's behaviors because a lot of times they.
It's just
okay, let's talk about humans. Recidivism and things like that. It's you could literally take a human being and make jail be the most hellish experience that they worse than they could possibly conceive of, and then after letting them out, they will still do something that'll get them in jail because people do not. Well, a lot of times people who go to jail are stupid. Okay, they just don't.
They have literally traumatic brain injuries.
Right, a lot of times they do that. They
damaged.
Don't consider the fact that this will lead to this. There's not a consideration of the future, and so people who consider the future all the time and are thinking about the future all the time don't really understand the way that other brains work that are not at all considering the future. A lot of times they're only considering what's going on right now. There is no future going on in their brain, and so the likelihood of X happening is not something that happens in their brain. And so when you lower that even further to primates, there's just trying out different. Okay, there's completely random mutations of behavior. They're random. In other words, they're like this mutation of brain. Receptors leads to certain behaviors. There's different random mutations of brain structure that give certain behaviors, and so that leads to attempting various things, and whether or not there is a risk. That does end up constraining it, because those who then just take the risk, sometimes they just end up dying. But then there would be those who take the risk and win, and they would continue forward, and they would go up in the hierarchy. So yes, there would be those individuals who successfully murdered in secret and therefore went up in the hierarchy and were rewarded and therefore continued their genes forward. So that's the point.
And we have that in humans. We clearly developed evolutionarily that system in humans. It is survivable. So why don't monkeys have it? Why aren't monkeys killing in secret?
Well, they occasionally do. That's how a lot of times during troop war, and you have different troop wars, they will kill individuals. There are little things like that happening to a certain extent.
There's individual the male will kill babies.
Yeah,
that happens.
So there is, but what was our original? What's our original thesis here that we're talking about?
Why did we bring it up in the first place? Because we're talking about status and gregariousness. And working within groups.
So the original thesis is that that group morality.
Chimps are predatory. That they're only constrained.
They're only constrained by the group. And well, I mean, at a certain point, human beings, everything is only constrained by that which is outside of it, and
Right.
but because that which is outside of it is what made it in the first place. We are an expression of everything outside of us over a long enough period of time.
Okay.
We're simply the convergence of a large set of events. So I mean, the fact that we're having this problem is because we create these arbitrary borders on what a thing is. We're saying a human is a thing, and the truth of the matter is a given human or even a species of human is not just one single individual thing disconnected from its environment. It is an expression of environment over time, and we are the convergence of events.
So basically what he said was that clearly there's no inevitable internal limit to the aggressive map schemas, and you said, no,
Right.
there is.
Yeah, there is an internal limit because it is good to limit those behaviors, which could
It's good for survival.
yeah, it could end in because when it comes down to it, altruism is by itself a selfish behavior.
Yeah.
That being altruistic
For
benefits the
anyway.
group,
Yeah.
then the group benefits the individual, and so everything actually is, even love. Okay, here's the thing:
It's
anything you want to see is beautiful,
it's
moral,
transactional.
all of those things. They are actually, there's a way to view them as a completely cold, dead, just good for it's just game theory. It's just mechanics. It's just the best way to fucking do it. That's the reason why animals have things like love and things like morality and things these concepts of beauty and all those things are an expression of the best way to do things, period. And so you can view that as cold and dead, or you can just simply choose to view reality as reality. And there are things that are beautiful to us, and that's just part of so I guess we do have to exactly. And so you can choose to see a mother nursing her child and sacrificing herself for her child as beautiful and something that is worthy and good, or you can choose to view it from a dead, cold perspective that she's maximizing her genes. And both the things are true. Neither one of those things, they seem in opposition only because that's just a habit that we have of seeing these things in opposition. They're not in opposition. They are the same thing. You can simply view all of reality as just this cold, dead, mechanical structure that leads to the best outcomes are the ones that end up surviving. But the point is that there still is these things that are harmonious, that there are certain things that harmonize with what reality is, and we see that kind of as beauty. And so it's, I guess there's kind of this perspective that you kind of have to understand, that I have underneath the surface, that I'm not I didn't necessarily say from the get-go here, but yes, that's true. There is there's a reason why having an internal moral compass is valuable to a given individual, because you go and you murder outside the group and do it in secret, eventually it could end up biting you in the ass. And so being a moral individual and having an internal moral compass, an internal limiter, is valuable to that individual.
And among humans, we have both.
Right.
Both the strategies are alive and well.
Right. We have people who are only constrained by the group. That is absolutely true. And there are people who have an internal fucking moral compass, and that is true. And it's not, and
they're both valid survival strategies.
Right. Exactly.
So far, anyway.
Exactly. They both ended up surviving.
One of them might peter out soon. We'll see.
And the reasons why we think of certain things as good or not, for me, the reason why I think of something as good or not is because I look at things from a perspective of what is going to come about, what's going to bring about the end of a species, because species do go extinct.
Yeah.
The reason they go extinct a lot of times is because they have mutated improperly to no longer fit a changing situation in their environment.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that has to do with short-sightedness. They're using up all their resources. Like as a group, the group is using up all the resources and comes to an evolutionary dead end and goes fucking extinct. That happens all the fucking time. That's why there's billions of species that have gone extinct. And so therefore the way I see things as a good behavior, as a good human, has a lot to do with whether or not it's going to lead to the destruction and suffering that eventually either makes us go nearly extinct or makes us go extinct. That is a bad behavior. And so, but from a short-term perspective, it may be seen as a good behavior. Simply I hate trying to find something that seems to be a universally good behavior and then showing how it's bad, but you can do that, okay? Right. You can show how what seems to be a universally good behavior can go terribly fucking wrong and therefore be a bad behavior.
It's like telling the truth.
Yeah,
somebody comes to your house, asks, "Where's your family?" I'm gonna kill them. Oh, right there.
They're back there. Whereas most of the time, telling the truth does actually help the cohesion of the group.
Yourself,
and
the group, everybody.
It helps everybody because you work together better. So yeah, that's a good simple one. That's not terribly horrible.
Right.
I think of things like protecting children end up being or feeding people or
Yeah.
and I can find a way that ends up being a bad behavior. I can show a situation
but
that makes
that's
that so bad.
but that's bordering on black magic because
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to talk about that.
They can inject too much cynicism.
Right. So yes, morals. Everything that's good, it is just the best way of doing things. That's all it is. It's because that is what ended. Those are complex systems that ended up leading to the survival of species.
Hold on a second. There's something about what did he? There's no inevitable internal limit. There's something about the word inevitable that Charles is latched onto.
Oh well, now by saying inevitable,
I'm not quite sure I follow. But
and having that as a qualifier, that's something that we weren't really talking about.
Yeah,
so
he
yes,
was.
yeah,
I don't follow.
okay,
But...
no. If he uses the qualifier
inevitable.
Then
there's no inevitable internal limit to the
aggressive
map schema.
Yes, absolutely. There's no absolute, is what he's saying there.
Oh,
yeah,
well.
no shit. Yeah, so
I'm not gonna disagree with that.
Yeah, exactly. And so by using that qualifier, he did kind of escape anything that we were saying. In other words, there's no reason to argue with him.
Right.
He is escaping any criticism because that is the appropriate way to say that there's no inevitable limit.
We're just adding nuance to his statement.
Right. And at this point, yeah, not arguing, since he said inevitable, that would make it more correct. And so there is how you interpret what he means by inevitable. Because I would say maybe invariable would be the way that Charles is interpreting it, whereas inevitable, in a given individual, I was thinking a given individual does not have an inevitable. And the truth is, I think there are certain individuals who do have an inevitable limit. In other words, there's a limit they will not cross almost under any fucking circumstances, period. And that can end up in their death. A lot of times when there are, let's take individual humans. When they're in an extremely dangerous, let's take human beings on an island, like there's all these different shows where these people is trying to survive.
Naked and Afraid.
Yeah, no, not Naked and Afraid, but like I'm thinking of what's that show where they're like, it's The Island. Okay, it's actually called The Island. Island, where you're in a group where there's this murderous type of individual who is dominating the group and will eventually and has taken a disliking to you. And the truth of the matter is, if you are the kind of person who will never, under any circumstances, ever murder, it is inevitable that you'll fucking die by that asshole's hand. So therefore, those people who would never cross that moral line because of their own internal moral compass, in that situation, they are maladaptive.
Yeah.
They're maladaptive because if there's a hyper aggressive person who is trying to dominate everybody and has set their sights on you, they are going to eventually fucking murder you. And so therefore, you have to have the ability to murder them first. And so that is. That is the situation where, yes, there are inevitable limits, and certain individuals have inevitable limits where they would never actually engage in first murdering someone, and therefore under that extreme circumstance, that extreme exceptional rule, I mean, that is a very exception, where the exception then becomes the rule, and it becomes the dominant hierarchy, because otherwise you die. Yeah, that is a hyper situational exception,
but it happens,
and therefore, yeah, you by having good morals, you end up dying. Yeah. And they end up showing that on TV all the time. They like to show that exception a whole lot,
as if we don't already know.
Yeah, it's like, yes, we know that there's that exception.
Thanks,
happens.
Game of Thrones. Thank you. We know.
Yes, we know. We know evil prevails under certain circumstances. We know. Thank you. Yes. Let's make sure that we don't have those circumstances where evil prevails. All right. Where were we?
As the child, I believe we're on page 8, second full paragraph. Yeah. Swanson's control hierarchy to the cortical top, the end of...
Okay, before there are statable rules, there are behavioral patterns.
Right.
As the child progresses, complex social understanding emerges. The child imitates himself, using procedure to map procedure at the initial embodied stage of genuine representation.
Huh?
Right? I think what he's saying is that
the child imitates himself using procedure to map procedure, like iterative practice.
In other words, exactly.
Humaning?
Right, doing it again and seeing whether or not there is success. And so that's why you'll actually see kids like do very repetitive processes. Why they're doing very repetitive processes.
Oh, especially if it's like a joke or something, they just say it over and over and over until they get a reaction.
Right, they're testing. It's part of their. It's part of them sciencing, basically. Yeah. They are trying to figure out the
scientific method.
Right. They're. It's like, okay, and so now I've established that this is a successful behavior. Isn't that mine? Maybe not.
That's mine, but I'm sharing it.
Now that I've established this is a successful behavior, at what frequency is it successful? So therefore, they have to repeat.
True.
And so they're testing. Yeah.
What is it? Used a word that was weird to me.
Okay. So this is at the initial embodied stage of genuine representation. Any successful map schema is immediately replicated, practiced, automatized, and readied for future employment. Piaget. Matter of fact, he's talking about Piaget all the time here, man.
Because he's talking about children, of course.
Yeah. Piaget and his research on children is
even
I know about that.
Yeah, everybody fucking loves Piaget. They're just constantly doing the references to Piaget in my group. Yeah, just oh my god, they fucking worship Piaget. Okay, and yeah, sure, whatever. Piaget must have been around kids a lot when he was younger. He's like, yeah, I noticed all these same things, and I didn't read any of Piaget. All right, imitation that extends to others. Patterned social interactions begin to emerge as the play partners exchange information about which reactions are desirable, and a prototypical morality emerges, even amongst rats. So let's see. Pattern social interactions emerge as play partners exchange information. Yep, okay. So basically they're just saying that a type of prototypical morality emerges, and that's going to be dependent upon the group that is socializing. So there is a set of map schemas within a little social group that emerges through the play systems, and therefore you have your little social hierarchies.
You have little prototypes for what works.
Right. And the ones that are the most successful, like convincing the others and things like that, because of their particular schemas, end up being the popular kid. All right. All right, control over map schema formation shifts to emergent systems of more complex control. Hippocampal maturation allows for determination by context. The orbitofrontal and dorsolateral prefrontal cortices increasingly grant abstractions value status. So then what they're saying is that there is a development of certain brain areas that we see in children as they age and start to become teenagers, and then you have basically abstractions that gain value, removing the individual from the short-term horizon of basic motivation. So what they're saying is that as the human goes from child to teenager to adult, we see this development of brain areas, which we can then trace to these behaviors, which are going from very physical interactions as a child and these repetitive behaviors to development of social schemas and situations that are dependent upon their socialization, and then that has all these symbolic meanings, etc. And so they go from basic motivation to symbol-based motivation.
The thing that he started.
Right. So he's saying these complex things, they end up becoming abstract symbols for various things. And so that's part of how we socialize, and we carry out social behaviors without necessarily recognizing that they are social behaviors. They become very automated.
What do you mean?
People do social interaction things all the time.
Oh,
They're
okay.
like little social aggressions against each other and things like that. They're completely automatic.
Social hierarchy, the dominance hierarchy behaviors.
Dominance hierarchy, and so that's why a lot of times people who are the unpopular kids stay the unpopular kids the rest of their lives, because they've automated
that schema.
They've adopted that schema, and they're just continuing on from the schemas that they developed during the development of the brain. So that's kind of what's intimated here.
And that's why we all carry baggage from our childhood.
Right, exactly, because of the developmental process.
Specifically the map schema.
Right. Hierarchy. Okay. Higher order, more explicit, cooperative morality emerges around 7.
Piaget.
Piaget. Okay. Piaget over and over. Okay. Each child now tries to win to dominate the hierarchy of game achievement. At first glance, this appears competitive. However, all disagreements about the game have to be resolved before any attempt to play, let alone win, can begin. And all striving must remain civilized enough that the game can continue.
So we're talking about sportsmanship rules.
I think maybe that's what he's talking about. Is that
we have to do that? It's either an emergent property or imposed, but there
unfortunately, because there's like at least 3 different definitions of the word game here that are problematic. There's game theory, which is very important in this context.
There's social games.
There's social games, which are just playing these little
dominance hierarchy
that have to use abstractions to talk about all the dominance hierarchy struggle that are games themselves. And then there's
games.
Child's literal games, right? So
which are also
so I think he's talking about child's literal games.
I think so too.
Yes. And that's when child's games go from being completely undefined bullshit to actually having defined rule sets.
Practice
and they actually around 7. He's saying around 7 they actually have actual rules to games.
So are they practicing for cooperation here, or what are they practicing?
I don't know. I don't know what he's saying.
Well, because what I'm trying to say is that a lot of times when animal children play, it is practice for some adult activity. And so I just wonder if that also holds true for everything that humans do, or because we have so many abstractions.
Well, to some extent, a lot of it's just coming from our primate ancestry. So, at first glance, it appears competitive. However, all disagreements about the game have to be resolved before any attempt to play, let alone win. Now, that's not necessarily true. There's lots of kids who purposefully keep changing the rules as part of the second level game. We were talking about the second definition.
And then eventually nobody wants to play with them anymore.
No, not necessarily. If
their parents have a lot of cool toys, they do.
No, it's not even that. A lot of times what happens is they're using their social hierarchy. A popular kid, when they start changing the rules to the game to win over and over, they're testing their followers. Right. And the followers then go, yes, that's the new rules. And anybody who disagrees is on the outside of this group. And they develop a group. So and then they start pushing other people out. And if you're not good at the second level game while playing the first level game, then you say, no, this is the rules. And then they go, no, it's not. You haven't figured out the second level game we're playing. And that is
figured out the real rules.
Right. You've been caught on first level games. We're on second level games.
You're clearly stupid and behind the times. You go on the bottom.
Exactly. And that's why a lot of people who are very much about the rules end up losing at social game, because the social game is something else.
Because they don't understand that they're having the same issue
it's
with
more
the
complex.
definition of game.
Yes, exactly. Well, they don't even know there's all these different levels of game.
Right.
All right. So.
So talking about all disagreements about the game have to be resolved.
Yeah, even these more complex play forms emerge procedurally rather than explicitly. If the playing children are separated and interviewed individually, they give disparate accounts of the emergent game's rules. They still need the information provided by the others' presence to maintain the game. I think these.
Really interesting.
I think they're not recognizing what we're talking about here.
What do you mean?
In other words, he's saying that they need the others to determine the rules of the game, and it's because he's not recognizing that there are no hard rules. Yeah. He first says there's hard rules, and then shows that there aren't any.
Yeah, there aren't any hard rules.
He is in this paragraph. He is contradicting himself. Yeah. He's saying that there have to be rules before you can play, and then when we interview them, nobody knows the rules.
But there are rules.
There are shifting rules that are not determined. The point is that they're determined because they're extremely soft, depending on all these different things.
Implies that everyone came together and agreed on it.
Right, and so he's wrong to start with, and that's
it's a misnomer to call it determined, because that paints it in a very different light.
Right. Okay. So and so the second part, they still need information provided by the others.
But I love that.
Present to maintain the game.
I love that. That's a thing.
Absolutely true. That's because it's a second level game that most men fail at. Actually,
and it's entirely social, minute to minute calculation. There are no rules.
Right. Once a game becomes a regular occurrence, however, it can be explicitly codified.
If you repeat it enough times, sure.
Yeah, the patterns that constitute the game and the explicit description of the game come into alignment. The children map their own socially modified sensory-motor outputs and become conscious players. And I think they're not. Here's the thing with older research like Piaget that he's
1932, folks.
1932, exactly. A lot of times they were only studying men and they were not studying females, and females are better at second level games and they engage in and once the game becomes codified like that, girls tend to stop playing.
And also
because they're like, okay,
they can't win.
Well, it's not just that. Then the boys are all going, these are the rules. You have to play by the rules. The rules are the rules because you can't play the game if you don't, and you can't determine who actually won unless you play the rules. And so the boys get fixated on the rules and start playing rule-based games, and then girls go, fuck you. You're playing that old stupid shit. You're not actually playing the more powerful social game, which is to determine who is with you.
So they go
and you have to keep shifting the rules if you want to determine who is with you, which is what social game is. That is the power, is determining who's with whom and at what level they are with whom, and who they will support you against and who they will defect with, and determining the support versus defection, and how much. Basically, playing politics is the more important gregarious game, not the determinate rules games. Determinate rules games are a lower type of game to primates.
Also, I think something needs to be said for 1932.
Yeah.
World War I, Dust Bowl, the Great Depression, World War II. There was a tremendous amount. World War II is later, obviously, but there was a tremendous amount of coming together that people did for the war effort in World War II. So clearly, we had a group of individuals that were more cooperative, perhaps, than are now in the 30s.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing:
different kinds of humans.
Rules-based behavior creates hierarchies, and
wasn't the Great
creates
Depression
stable hierarchies.
right around the 30s, or when was
no,
the Great
Depression was.
20s?
Yeah, I think I get confused on that.
This is right
because
around
there's the Roaring '20s, and it's like, wait a minute, that was
World
that
War
just
I,
before the Depression? I think.
The
I think
Great
it was,
Depression, World War II. That's around the time where Piaget.
Well, World War II is
45,
40s. Yeah. Well, ended
40.
ended in 44, I think.
And it started in like 37, 38. Like it started early.
Yeah, I guess.
So point is, it's right in there. That's a very unique time. People are very different.
So
than
working
now.
together, it requires rules. Absolutely. So development of a hierarchy is very important. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I agree. You should
Piaget's
definitely
research.
Exactly. That it is, when you're talking about an effective group, they have to have a hierarchy, and to have a hierarchy, you have to have rules, and you have to behave according to those rules, and everybody has to behave according to the rules.
1930s people are going to be
however,
different
when we're talking about competition, there is social competition, and when you're attempting to be a good competitor, which is to be good at social war, then being good at social war is constantly redetermining the rules to test who is with whom, and so basically being a deceiver and playing basically constantly redefining things and playing all those games. That is the more powerful weapon, because we're talking about a weapon and which destroys hierarchy, because you want to destroy the hierarchy if you need to move up in it.
Sure.
So constant destruction of hierarchy is better social game.
Right, so back to that question. You said that girls stop playing the game once the rules become codified and no second level gaming is allowed. Is that because they know they can't?
Because girls are usually, they are playing the second level game at all times.
Right, and so when they're not allowed to, they just fuck off and create their own game.
Right,
they
just stop playing with boys.
Right. Oh yeah. At that age, so we're talking about developmentally.
Right.
Boys and girls play together when they're both the same kind of cooperative human, but then once the female hormones start to kick in, they stop playing with boys because they can't play second level.
Or the male hormones kick in, and male brains go more towards recognizing that rules are important, and but recognizing but they overstay. That's when men start oversimplifying as well. They become more
pedantic.
Right, more pedantic, but then also create more stable structural systems.
While girls become more chaotic, but also able to disrupt structures that need potentially to be
right. Sometimes there is value in disrupting structures that are stable. Stable structures eventually go bad.
Not as often as it's important to build them, but whatever.
Yeah, that's true. Well, that's true. Absolutely. But that and that is part of why old systems usually favored males in control, I believe, is because you want a system to remain more stable. Therefore, you need to, more often, it needs to be the rule that you stay according, even if it's a failing system or it's not a perfect system, you need to stay with a system, any system, for a period of time.
That explains patriarchy.
Right. Yeah.
Like what people see as the actual, truly, yes, there are men who are in charge in science, and it's always been
And
men,
they're trying to stay to according to a set of rules. And I personally have a hard time with pedantics and their adherence to rules. That is one of my biggest problems in science right now. Is that they are adhering to a system because it is good to adhere to systems, and it's terrible to adhere to systems because the system will eventually be no longer valid, and so you have to break the system at some point, and those people who are preserving the system eventually become the enemy, and you have to stop them because they are preserving a system that's leading down a dead end.
But you have to preserve a system.
But you have to preserve systems,
and then men have to be in charge.
and then somebody has to break the system. And so the system has to be broken. That's why a lot of times women are revolutionaries, and they're part of revolution.
Or
most
they
of the time.
engage with men in a way
and that leads to revolution. Right? No, I mean, women actually lead to positive revolutions all the time because they are good at breaking systems.
And society listens to women because we value them.
So that is something that has to exist. Disruption of stable systems has to exist for adaptation. Especially group adaptation.
And so, of course, here the next thing that comes up on that is when we're talking about higher level game, the social game. The question is the lower level, the rules based, like the basic level of the game, the foundational level of these are the rules. This is the game. This is us cooperating. That seems to be more important for survival than playing second order games.
Second order games get you higher in the hierarchy. So if the most important thing in a group is being higher in the hierarchy because it's a stable group. Now if it's not a stable group, if the group is under duress, then playing according to the rules. In other words, a stricter hierarchy is important when this group is under duress. When the group is under duress, they need to act more like a military. They need to be more hierarchical and stable, and a stable hierarchy needs to exist for them to behave as one unit. However, it can become more advantageous to socially climb when the group itself is stable.
Let's not forget that those are our social instincts, and yes, they are maladaptive. It is definitely much better to play the basic rule-based game than it is to do social machination, but bitches can't help themselves. They can't.
Well, I think there are times that women. Okay.
I mean, men, women. Whatever.
Here's the thing. I would say
just as a gender.
Rules versus exceptions. I think is a conservative versus liberal mindset, and that we have to have. That's why we have to have kind of balanced mindsets. Do you go with the rules, or do you go with the exceptions? Do you stay with a given structured hierarchical sort of systems, or do you start to build in more complexities, look at the exceptions to try to determine which exceptions need to become the new rule, because that's what ends up happening when you destroy a system. It can't be just for destruction. It has to be replacement with a new system, because you're trying to determine what the new emerging rule is. Why is the current stable system becoming obsolete? Mm-hmm. And so that is, you're supposed to determine not just simply destroy the old system. It's like you don't just destroy an old building. You have to have some reason to destroy the old building, because you're going to build a new building that is more valuable, more useful, a better use of that space. And so that is where a lot of searching for what is the new set of rules, what is the new system that will emerge, and trying to predict that I think that a lot of times that is what women are doing a lot of times. And it is searching, and that is what more feminine male minds are doing. Right. And people who are more towards the middle have a good balance of both. That's why your extremists are such shit, is because they're either completely destroying everything or just staying the fucking hierarchical dumb shit. And so you got this absolute destruction or absolute chaos or absolute order. And that's why the minds that are more in the middle are capable of adapting to the various situations and using both of them. Wait a minute, I feel like there's something else that you were talking about.
Well, yeah, the point was basically which one is higher level social game is only status determined. In other words, I'm just trying to read into what is being said, because like on one hand, yes, it is definitely better to cooperate for the good of the group. It seems like the thing that would survive evolutionarily would be the cooperate together to create a good society. Why would we need to have? But it's like, but we've developed a social creatures doing nothing but social climbing.
Well, cooperating means that you're cooperating for a purpose. If you're cooperating for a purpose, there is an inherent plan in the way that the cooperation comes together. Okay, so in other words, it's cooperating to do what? To do something, to gather resources. To gather what resources? So there's all of these things outside of the system that determine the structure of the system. And so therefore there's the structure of the system that is, and the system is your group. When the structure of that group, in other words, you got a certain number of basket weavers, you got a certain number of fishermen, you got a certain number of, and the way all that works is dependent upon the availability of reeds, the availability of a given fish, the availability of, who's making nets. Well, can you catch a certain kind of fish with a certain kind of net at this given time? And so your whole structure is all dependent upon things outside of it.
Right. So the idea is that yes, cooperating gives you resources, therefore increases your survival. So why the fuck would we ever play second level? Why would that be?
Because
a thing that survived, I guess.
Well, then there's
Aside
various
from the
levels. Okay,
revolution.
so within a group, you have it. I think part of the value of being more like a military amongst, like, say you got hunter gatherers, and so you got women gathering, men hunting. There are working together and not caring about who's got what is very important to things like hunting. Whereas when you're gathering, you have to be looking at subtleties and very selective, and what berry is the ripest, and then you have to be able to compete for the resources that you're gathering for your individual family, and so there's a level.
Some would say you could
I think
even
it's
do that
better
with,
to be somewhat competitive as a female than it is as a male. In other words, it is more dangerous as a male to be competitive.
Because
there's more negatives as a male to be more competitive amongst each other
you'll
once you've
get
established a
together.
side. And so there's longer periods of time. So there's stability, and then there's times of stability and times of chaos. Now there is competition and cooperation amongst
both.
men as well. It's just I think it's a
Which
time
kind of
scale.
the meat do you get?
Well, it's just a time scale thing. In other words, for women, I think there's a shorter time scale that the cycles of competition are valuable in, and so it is more valuable to. And the type of competition they do is usually much less aggressive. It is much less intense.
It's more leveraging and small.
Right, and there's still exactly. There's small amounts, and they almost never get to the point where they kill each other. Whereas there's no aggressive. Whereas men do. So men go longer without competitive stints, and then their competitive stints are far more
stronger.
Yeah, exactly.
More intense.
Right, more intense.
Yeah, but that makes so much sense, because as a male group, you need to cooperate in order to catch a predator, while because there's one of them. And in other words, it's a much higher risk thing to do, to go after an animal. While women, they have like a fucking field of berries. There's a shit ton of fucking berries, and if you're and you pick a certain number of berries, and some are less ripe than others, and then you get to do the little social stuff of who gets the ripest berry, and it's really
and
not
just that, you're also very close to each other. There's much more talking available. In other words, like, men have to be quiet while they're hunting. Women can be communicating
constantly,
so they can be constantly testing each other's loyalties, testing,
and checking in with each other that we're still cool, even though we might have this hierarchy thing, but we're still,
we're still a group, but we're trying to find out what's the best. How can I get higher in my group? How can or how can I at least protect my position or keep from getting lower, or all of those various things that they can be doing. That is part of not just the gathering, but also part of the system of navigating that hierarchy. And identifying, there is a new position about to become available because somebody's sick, and so therefore the hierarchy is about to shift. So it's time to go into figuring out who's going to be in that new position. It's like there's a lot of different reasons why. I mean, that competition would be more. It would be on a shorter time scale, I suppose. All right, so higher order, more explicit, cooperative morality emerges around 7. Each cell now tries to win, to dominate. Okay, I think that's too far back. All right. Okay, the play forms emerge procedurally rather than explicitly. If the playing children are separated, they don't know the rules.
We're right there, right past PAJ.
All right.
The second.
Well, the second one, yes. Yeah. The children map their own socially modified sensory-motor outputs and become conscious players, able to inhabit fictional, social, dramatic worlds, highly abstracted and communal map schemas. It is the ability to establish these joint schemas that allows for the modulation of motivation and emotion towards some shared end. So I think what they're talking about is right here. They're talking about games of imagination, where they say we're playing this game and they're just,
lava.
you're the dragon and yeah, exactly, the floor is lava, and the play of the tea party and all that kind of pretend stuff is a exercise. Exactly, an exercise in cooperation. And sharing map schemas, and basically
sharing a goal.
What do we do in given situations? This is what we do in given situations. In a good game, there are many opportunities for joint gain. There's no need to be predatory or defensive, so there's little need for violence. Well-socialized adults add their opinions to the process, insisting that players play fair and act as good sports. How you play the game is more important than whether you win or lose.
That's an important schema.
Yeah, well, it's exactly. Being more cooperative with each other. He's veering into opinion here about well-socialized adults. That saying insisting that players play fair.
I don't see a citation, so yep.
Yeah, that's his opinion. I don't completely agree. I somewhat agree with what he's saying, but there's definitely some room for variation in that. The adults know implicitly that life is a sequence of games, and that those who play properly during a given game become the popular players of many games, benefiting cumulatively from playing each. Thus, a vital form of meta-morality emerges. The best player is he who is invited to play the most games. Sacrificing a future invitation for present victory is a counterproductive long-term strategy. Yes, right. What he's talking about is that amongst social games, you have to make sure that you are popular, and that is you have to be in with the group. And this goes back to what I was saying about a social brain versus an inventor brain. Because an inventor brain is one that is specialized towards individual survival instead of specializing towards what he's talking about.
I want to read. I want to read this footnote. Let's see, where was it actually added? Where is 11 here? Somewhere on this page, there is 11. There it is. Even among rats. Patterned social interactions begin to emerge as the player's partners exchange information about which actions are desirable, and a prototypical morality emerges even among rats. When juvenile rats are paired together repeatedly in rough and tumble wrestling bouts, one rat will end up on top more frequently. However, if the now dominant rat pins its playmate more than 70% of the time, the subordinate who initiates play sequences begins to ignore the victor and play diminishes. Dominant rat must learn to respond to the cues of the subordinate if it wishes to keep playing. Such modulation lays the foundation for the higher order morality, keeping aggression and other potentially antisocial schema properly regulated among rats.
Yeah, and here's the thing. As a child, I was a pedantic, and whenever I played games to win every fucking time. And so I would absolutely crush and dominate every player I played against.
100% of the time.
100% of the time, would almost never fucking lose.
That's 30% more than
and people stopped playing with me.
You were not invited to any more games.
I was not invited to games.
No.
Yes.
You play with me.
No, I eventually figured that out and started letting people win all the time.
Yep.
And so
started playing dumb, basically.
But the thing is, I figured that out consciously instead of figuring it out subconsciously.
As rats and others do.
And those with strong social emotions, who are not pedantics, who are not autistic spectrum, have that built in a feeling sense. It comes to them through, they don't have to figure it out. It comes to them automatically as a behavior that they have automatically. They don't have to figure that shit out. I had to figure out, people aren't playing with me because I am dominating them.
It could have been any number of things. So you had to go through the scientific method process.
I had to sit there and say, why? And it's like, okay, if I want to play more games, I'm going to have to let these people win. That is something I had to figure out explicitly, and there are people who figure out lots of subtle things like that. Not necessarily that one. That one's so obvious that maybe that is kind of a thing that a lot of people end up figuring out explicitly. I don't even know. But there's a lot of things like that come from.
I think most people
come from strong systems already built into their in other words, they're strong social systems built into their instincts. They are more
right. They have strong schemas.
Right.
For
Well,
social
and
schemas.
it's very automated. In other words, they
It's
come
natural to them.
to a pedantic, to a more rules based mind, to the autistic spectrum inventor mind. It's too explicit, and things are much more explicit because that is a basically. I think that a lot of times that stress may actually modulate the expression of autism and Asperger's. I think that
definitely know it modulates other social,
right,
like presenting behaviors and things like that.
which completely makes sense on evolutionary terms. If a child is undergoing extreme stress, it's likely that that's an indicator that it's outside the group, and so therefore it will have to find ways to, and so therefore the system that engages is automatically via stress. It should therefore engage individual survival
right.
systems.
The
And
status
so
system
from a programming standpoint, you need something that senses the environment, switches systems.
And we're back to that argument of
right.
status versus individual.
Right, and so therefore, so that's when you have this stress. I think and that's one of the things that they find, by the way, is that increases in memory, and there's a lot of different things that happen to a child under stress.
And my personal pet theory, which has been, there's evidence indicating that this is true. The intense stress and pain, circumcision leads to autism.
I don't know.
There's It's
it
not.
Might, you mean a contributor?
It's a correlative. It's a very strong correlation.
Yeah, it could be one thing
and I'm thinking that it might between breastfeeding and circumcision. I'm thinking between the two of those.
Extreme damage to a sexual organ early in a primate's development. I could see how that could be an indicator to a primate brain that
forget the social shit. You ain't reproducing.
Yeah,
Go be useful in a tool's way.
Yeah, exactly. It could be. There's a possibility that might be a contributor.
Right. I just stumbled upon some compelling research.
It would not be I would
lines.
not say it's a strong contributor, but I could see it being a contributor of 10,000 things. One of 10,000 things. Yeah, sure.
Because certainly we've had, we started down the path of autism before we had circumcision.
Okay.
So there is but I think early childhood stress is definitely.
Yes, that would be one of, and if you add enough different stresses, then a brain will then figure out that you are this individual is in stressful situation. Ergo, the systems that should be dominant are X, and that's something that would develop over time.
So here's the really interesting stuff. As a victim of the Spock method, which I partially is genetic, partially I think my autism is part of being exposed to a Spock method when I was an infant.
Autistic spectrum, you mean?
Right. What are the odds that Spock is the name? Like, did they know that the Spock method would cause people to be more autistic, and that's why they named?
Is that why they named that character Spock?
Yes,
maybe.
That's what I'm saying.
I don't know. What's the timing on that?
That's what I'm saying. Anyway,
the Spock method. When did that come?
Spock method is old as fuck.
Yeah, how old though? I mean, because fucking Star Trek was what?
Anyway, I just find that fascinating because I do blame the Spock method for my social issues.
Yeah.
Some of them anyway, of course. Not all. But once you create a particular schema in an infant's brain, it's much more likely
stress
that
being is this because a lack of response of a parental unit. When you look at like from breastfeeding to how much a child gets to cuddle. I mean, just like the way that they had like an instance where the feeding monkey was like a feeding baby monkey was given a thing that was kind of like a mother to cuddle with, and other times they had nothing to cuddle with, and just that alone had a huge difference in the way that their brain ended up developing. And so how much a child is cared for definitely changes the way that child develops. Absolutely, from infancy, the way that their brain develops. And so that would make sense that when you look at the way that it's easy to reverse engineer the systems, the evolutionarily developed systems, because you can look at what will end up benefiting and what should be indicators. Like a system has to be able to determine when to switch strategies. And so a child under stress should therefore have certain strategies that will fit what does a child under stress indicate? It indicates parents that are busy off, they're either having to deal with some sort of horror in their own lives, or they're or they've been killed, or there's a variety of things that fit a general pattern that you are now being born into a more hostile world. What is the best schemas that evolution has figured out, through over trial and error? What are the best schemas to have in that situation? And so it would lean the brain towards those schemas as opposed to the others. So in other words, it would be a less social environment, or a more aggressive social kind of interaction system that would be selected by the by stress's modulation to the brain. What are you reading there?
Really fascinating stuff. I'll tell you more about the Spock method and the question that you asked, but I was reading his opinions on circumcision, and it's just interesting because of course he recommended it. In 1989, there was an article that Red Book magazine stated at first in the 1940s he favored circumcision. And then, however, by 1976, the revised version of Baby and Child Care, which is like the Bible that people kept it next to the Bible, it was like that much of an influential book. I'll tell you more about it in a second. He was saying that there is no medical reason for it, but at first he was like, you have to do it within the first few days of birth because that'll lower the chance of cervical cancer. Men don't have a cervix!
Well, what they're talking about is that they believe that circumcised penises versus uncircumcised
will
penises
give cervical cancer
right.
to women. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Men get circumcised, women most affected, and avoid psychological trauma to children. But then later he was like, circumcision of males is traumatic, painful, and of questionable value.
Well, yeah, later on he started going back on basically everything, didn't he?
Not exactly. The only thing that he went back on, or rather he switched, is that children need to start a vegan diet at the age of 2. Because he himself had a lot of health problems, switched to a vegetarian diet, lost a bunch of pounds, got healthy. But then why would you recommend veganism when it's vegetarianism that's good, not veganism, you moron? Anyway, point is, in 1946, Spock published the Common Sense book of Baby and Child Care, Common Sense, Baby and Child Care, which became a bestseller. Its message to mothers is that you know more than you think you do. Okay. According to the New York Times, Baby and Child Care was, throughout its first 52 years, the second best-selling book next to the Bible.
Wow.
Spock advocated ideas about parenting that were at the time considered out of the mainstream. So this is the fascinating part. Over time, his books helped bring about major change. He said that previous experts told parents that babies needed to learn to sleep on a regular schedule. Over time, his books helped bring about change. I don't understand if this is what Spock's saying or what other people say. But
he might have had some good ideas and some bad ideas.
It says previously experts had told parents that babies needed to learn to sleep on a regular schedule and that picking them up and holding them whenever they cried would only teach them to cry more and not to sleep through the night, a notion that borrows from behaviorism. They were told to feed the children on a regular schedule and that they should not pick them up, kiss them, or hug them because that would not prepare them to be strong and independent individuals in a harsh world. In contrast, Spock encouraged parents to see their children as individuals and not to apply a one-size-fits philosophy to them, which is not at all what my impression was whatsoever.
Yeah, that's exactly the opposite of what you were told was the Spock method.
Yes, so maybe my parents
I don't know, I haven't looked into it.
But, I also couldn't find the Spock method as a word by itself either. So, I'm going to have to...
Yeah, that's exactly the opposite, so...
learn more about that because... But then apparently it was his opposition to Vietnam War that lost him credibility.
Interesting. Well, okay, so we'll have to look into that later because obviously there's some confusion on that.
Yeah, I'll have to read more about... I'll just have to fucking buy the book and read it, shit.
Well, we could probably just do a little research on the side. Okay. Looks like, is this where we're at? I'm not sure.
Next page.
Yeah. A purely personal map schema specifies starting place, goal, objects of perception, and implication for emotion, dealing with the bits of the world relevant to a particular desire. The joint construction of such schema integrates perception across individuals, placing them in the same world of objects, aligning their emotions. Diverse individuals inhabit the same experiential space, cooperating both to reach a goal and to maintain the space's integrity. This is how fundamental agreements emerge, nullifying the very necessity for aggression or for terror. For the socialized, within the intact dominance hierarchy, the unbearable present predictably turns into the desirable future. Everyone plays the same game with the same rules at the same time. Emotion remains controlled. That's a weird set of statements. Maybe he's getting at something. The specific circuitry mediating such concordance has been recently outlined. Okay, so what he's saying is...
Yeah, everything that I'm seeing so far, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, it seems like Spock method, my parents did exactly what the Spock method was there to stop. And they did everything exactly the opposite of what the Spock method is. The Spock is like, he's talking about how if a kid, you can't give them, don't punish them, talk to them. If your kid is just throwing buttons all over the house, maybe they're playing some complex game that's their little universe. Don't limit them too much. Let them play. You know, all of these beautiful things that apparently is what the basic principles of Spock are. I'm like, all right, you should.
That's completely the opposite.
It's literally the opposite of what I believed my entire life. This is fun. So anyway.
All right. Yeah. I remember my parents talking about Spock method being something bad. So maybe
absolutely.
Maybe I misunderstood what it was too. All right.
And yes, we are not getting to the end of this paper tonight, which I knew because in our first 2 hours we only covered 7 pages, and it's an 18-page paper, so I knew it's going to be a 3-parter.
All right. So let me reread this.
Yes, sorry.
A purely personal map schema specifies the starting place, goal, objects of perception, and implications for emotion, dealing with the bits of the world relevant to a particular desire. I don't believe that. He's saying it's to a particular desire.
What does that mean?
Well, okay, so...
Well, I'm talking about a purely personal schema.
I guess he's talking about that... maybe the way you conceive of your goal or your path to a particular desire is personal. Maybe that's what he's trying to say. I don't know. It's strangely worded. The joint construction of such schema integrates perception across individuals, placing them in the same world of objects, aligning their emotions. Okay, so the fact that as a group you've all created these various schemas and tried to align them.
Like any group, you know, these are our goals. This is our mission statement.
Diverse individuals inhabit the same experiential space, cooperating both to reach a goal and to maintain the space's integrity. Okay, so basically, the way that you're cooperating together is to try to maintain the space's integrity. Okay, and so this is how fundamental agreements emerge. So basically, because you have the same sets of goals and the fact that you've been working together towards a larger group alignment, you have these unspoken ways to come to agreements. That's like, okay, if everybody's trying to fuck each other over, none of us can get to what we want, so therefore we have to work together, and that ends up getting us at least some of what we want. This is how fundamental agreements emerge, nullifying the very necessity for aggression or for terror. For the socialized, within the intact dominance hierarchy, the unbearable present predictably turns into the desirable future. So the idea here is that when you work within the hierarchy, you end up you think that you get what you want because even though it's not how you want it right now, you're at least working towards your goals. I think is what he's saying. That's how we experience these various schemas and how it winds up in all of these different agreements and things like that. Everyone plays the same game with the same rules at the same time. Emotion remains controlled. Okay, that's ideally. It's like, wow, that's such an ideal. That's like he's talking about such
among men again. What are you talking about?
Yeah, it's like what are you talking about? Emotion remains controlled. Everything works out. He must be saying it as an ideal. Ideally. This is the intention. Right. He's just not saying
that's the goal.
It's like you should be. He's kind of hard to interpret sometimes. All right. The specific circuitry mediating such concordance has been recently outlined. Okay, so now he's talking about, so I think what he's talking about is why is it that these systems work together the way that they do into this, harmonious social environment that is, that we attempt to move toward. So why is this a goal? Maybe that's what he's saying, is that why is a socially harmonious set of agreements and things like that even a goal? And why is it that a hierarchy is a goal? Maybe that's what he's trying to get at too. Maybe I need to take a drink of something here, man. My throat's all acting weird. Can you hear the funk to my voice? It's a little raspy. Excuse me.
Yeah, that explanation.
Let's see if this gets any better. Yeah. All right. Risolati fagosi angolese. Sounds like a great dish. I'd like a little risolati fagosi angolese.
That sounds like a great dinner.
Delicious. Delicious. Describe the behavior of certain visuomotor neurons located in the ventral premotor cortex. Some are motor neurons, but also respond to visual stimuli. Okay, that's interesting. Both visual and motor. Nice. Visual motor neurons. This is something
shit.
I am not even...
Is this how the dopamine Parkinsonism thing happens? Because
Ooh, that does make sense. Yeah, that's why they can't... Well, yeah, why can they not cross
a threshold that they see with their eyes?
Right, yeah, it's okay. Neat. Okay, yeah. I know it's somewhere in the substantia nigra.
Because D2 is a motor... the dopamine 2 receptors are motor receptors.
Okay, cool. All right. Some are motor neurons also respond to visual stimuli. Some are activated by 3D objects. The most relevant, however, mirror neurons require action for observation for their activation. Okay, yes. All right. Now this is coming back to me a little bit. Yeah. Mirror neurons, part of the system that uses motor output patterning as the basis of perception, have remarkable properties. They do not respond to a motivationally significant object in isolation. Interesting.
What does that mean?
Mirror neurons are part of a system that uses motor output patterning as basis for perception, have remarkable properties. Okay, so there's some sort of patterning required beforehand. They do not respond to a motivationally significant object in isolation. So in other words, they don't... they're context-based. In other words, if you see a cube... normally, it does not cause a cube in a person's hand juggling may cause a certain activation of these mirror neurons, but a cube in isolation will not cause that same activation.
Interesting. Which does make sense, I guess. You would need an activity if it's a motor neuron.
Right.
Neat.
So that's the remarkable properties talking about.
That's how you're able to watch somebody do something, and then you can
do it because it's very contextually based. So they only activate. So they're very specific. That's cool as fuck. All right. Nor do they respond to the sight of a conspecific engaged in a content independent action such as grasping. So therefore, if you're just grasping, and then you see them grasping, that's not going to make the mirror neuron do, because there's not enough specificity to the grasping. You got to be grasping a cube.
And I remember that research actually, reading those papers.
All right. More to the point, their responses match when a motivated sequence is observed and when it is enacted. This congruence can be strict, coinciding in goal and behavioral sequence.
Yeah, that's
sometimes, however, the congruence is broader, generalizing the goal of the observed action across many instances of it. This is akin to a child playing the role of father rather than precisely imitating any of the father's specific behaviors. A neural mechanism allowing for both imitation and the abstraction of imitation has thus been identified. Wait a minute, that doesn't follow from the previous.
Well, earlier he's literally describing the research on mirror neurons. Like, that's how we found out that there are mirror neurons, is the grasping stuff.
More to the point, their responses match when a motivated sequence is observed and when it is enacted. Yeah, okay. So mirror neurons are activated when you do it and when you see it. This congruence can be strict, coinciding in goal and behavioral sequence. Okay, I guess. Sometimes, however, the congruence is broader.
generalizing the goal of the observed action across many instances of it. Okay, so the congruence between
Observing and then reenacting it.
yeah, these things don't seem to follow. This is akin to a child's playing the role of father rather than precisely imitating any of the father's specific behaviors. A neural mechanism allowing for both imitation and the abstraction of imitation has thus been identified. I don't get that. There must be additional information that they're using to come to that conclusion, because one does not follow from the other. And what he's saying here. Yeah, it's like page 662. He's referencing some page.
Specific page.
Yeah, because his one statement does not follow from the second statement doesn't follow from the first. But we'll continue forward. Mirror neuron mediating understanding cascades downward from the abstract through the emotional to the physical. The mirror system accepts sensory, cognitive, and circadian state inputs and produces somatic, endocrine, and neuroendocrine outputs. Area F5, which contains the mirror neurons, shares connectivity to inferior parietal lobe with Area A of the superior temporal sulcus, part of the circuit including the amygdala and orbitofrontal cortex. This implies that mirroring extends beyond action to its emotional, motivational, cognitive, and neuroendocrine concomitants. So that makes sense. That basically it's integrated throughout the brain. The mirror neurons basically go all the way through orbitofrontal cortex, which is part of your limiting emotions, etc., and the amygdala, which is fear and social learning part of the brain. So it goes all the way through all of those. There is connectivity to all of those areas. And by connectivity, they mean short, direct, and activation-based connectivity. I'm pretty sure, because everything in the brain is eventually connected.
Synapses on it.
Right. Or there's at least some long, and they've seen some activation patterns going between them. In short-term activation patterns, because once again, everything connects to everything else in the brain.
Yes.
This implies that mirroring extends beyond action to its emotional, motivational concomitants. All right. It is the primate homologue of Broca's area, which has come to govern voluntary speech. F5, they're talking about, has relevant functions as well. So there's a certain area of the brain. So F5 is the primate homologue of the Broca's area, come to govern voluntary speech. So that is, they're talking about mirror neurons leading to speech. Interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting that the primates have their. I mean, they wouldn't need to have their own version of Broca's because they do communicate.
Yeah, but they just they don't.
Very limitedly.
Right.
Danger, food, cugs. That's about it. Help. Yeah. That's probably it.
The development of the mirror neuron system allows a maturing child to embody the action and motivational states of those he directly observes with greater or lesser fidelity. Okay, and this is very important to the whole autism spectrum conversation here, because autism spectrum is very strongly correlated with a lack of mirror neuron response. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind here as we're talking about. Or even I don't know if it's just lack of mirror neuron response, or even a reduction in total mirror neurons. I don't remember which of those it is. However, there is definitely a reduction of mirror neuron stuff associated with autism. And autism spectrum, of course, is also related to a difference in the amygdala as well.
And in language.
Right. And in language, yes. So all these things totally make sense. Okay. And then also remember, being male is being more autistic because there's changes in all of those areas for males versus females.
Modulated by testosterone.
Right. Modulated by testosterone. Got it. Okay. Moving on. The linguistic areas. Let's see. The linguistic abilities of Broca's area, integrated with the mirror neuron circuitry, allow communicating children to verbally instantiate shared map schema, not at the level of precise imitation, but at a higher generalized state. Thus, children engaged in pretend play can coordinate their motivations, emotions, actions, and perceptions. So basically saying that Verbal communication leads to connection of vast areas of the brain through the mirror neurons and language. Such processes of coordination within such schema lay the groundwork for the understanding of imagistic and more abstract semantic thought, including drama and fiction, and the ability to engage in increasingly adult-scale social enterprises. A plan is the projection of a compelling fiction onto agreed-upon objects and contexts. The successful joint establishment of such a plan, motivationally significant, emotionally gripping, eliminates the very necessity for uncertainty, anxiety, and conflict. This all means as well that it is not precisely individuals who occupy a given position in a given dominance hierarchy. So what he's saying here is that these fictions and the things that we share are part of the agreement process, and so therefore the stories we tell. He's basically saying that he's basically saying something that I said long ago, is that we are memes. He's saying that it is just like the selfish gene. He's kind of intimating the selfish meme, that these it's not necessarily individuals who occupy a given position in dominance hierarchy. It is sets of mapped schema. So mapped schema themselves cooperate and compete. Well, here we go. He is saying memetics very directly. Map schema can themselves cooperate and compete within and between individuals. The intra-psychic and social structure that results is the consequence of that process. Thus, in a properly formulated dominance hierarchy, the presuppositions of the individuals match the structure of the group. Thus, matching keeps the group stable and the individuals effectively regulated. Affectively. Not effectively, but affectively. Any challenge to this match, not simply to the intra-psychic or social structures themselves, therefore simultaneously dysregulates motivation and emotion. So he's saying that basically there's a very important so he's dealing with the social, the primate social brain, and how it and how that relates to human beings, and that basically all of our agreements between each other relate to very deep social areas of the brain, and all of these things are regulated on processes. And I'm saying, in opposition to this, we need to keep in mind that there is the autistic spectrum that is completely in opposition to all that he's saying right now. And he's saying that you have all of these ways that all these systems work together to keep this social cohesion, and all of these,
and they do.
And these ideas,
What?
these map schemas, are basically like what I call memes, except it's a map schema being a collection of ideas, which is basically what Dawkins meant by a meme, not just a very short little thing. It's entire collections of ideas. Like religions are very complex memes, and so this is the way that we all agree together to view the world and to interact with the world. Is something that actually
Feminism is a meme.
Is the way that social truth implants in human beings ways to work together, and sets of beliefs that are implicit, that we don't ever explicitly agree upon, but they are kind of imposed upon us as a basic underlying working system of social truth. And so and that is, of course, what gives rise to culture. So he's saying kind of all those things implicitly, and I'm trying to bring out some of the explicit particulars of what all that means. So his next section is the unknown, chaotic, unexplored, indeterminate world.
We want to leave that for next time? Or that's the next big.
Do we want to be done already? I don't know. Depends on
I figured that since we were covering quite a few patron-related sort of questions, those patrons that are there here, it's sort of like I can be okay with not having another after show, because I was kind of hoping to do an after show after we did the whole thing. Right. But the fact that we have to extend it over 3 shows makes me feel a little weird about skipping out after shows. I feel like we addressed certain patron questions throughout this talk that it could kind of count as a halfway after show.
So we can continue forward or do the after show.
Let's just continue going forward, and then find a good stopping point that we can actually finish.
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of complex stuff to talk about. I mean, here we're basically he's talking about a general scheme, and so I think he's eventually going to get to some of the stuff that I've been talking about interspersed. In other words, like I want to keep X in mind the entire time that we're talking about, you know, Y, and he's just talking about Y, and I think he's eventually going to talk about X also.
Right. So it seems like a lot of times when we do have an issue with what he says, a couple sentences later, he does sort of qualify it sometimes.
Not
always.
No, yeah.
But I noticed it a few times.
Right.
Let's say that. Based on that, I feel like we should try to get the whole thing under our belts. And then we were discussing a few complex things throughout the show today, and of course, certain patrons' alarms for when they need to go to bed went off 40 minutes.
Oh,
So,
okay.
I'm thinking 8 p.m. might be a nice.
All right, well then maybe we should go ahead and deal with that. So then next show we'll do this, novelty, anomaly, and map schema disruption. So yes.
But you know what? We have 15 minutes. Let's open up the floor to questions.
Yeah, and let's go ahead and talk. You know what? Let's talk about the first couple sentences here. So we what the next show will be about.
Yeah.
And so the frame consisting of point A and point B can well be considered a theory-laden map schema. Such a schema is also a story. However, in its simplest form, analogous to the necessary fiction of Wahinger and Adler and a bunch of other names. The life-space field of Lewin and the Dacian of phenomenologists. And the normal science of Kuhn. Oh, hey, he talked about Kuhn. Oh my God.
We know that.
Holy shit. Yes, So he's talking about normal science versus disruption. Oh my God. He's actually going to get into Kuhn. Thank God. Okay, I like him a lot better now.
Okay. But what is that mess of that sentence?
He's just saying
You know what? I will just look up each one of these things. The necessity of fiction of Weinherr and Adler, the life space field of Lewin, the Dacian of the phenomenologists, and the normal science of Kuhn.
I don't know what the fuck a Dacian is, though. What the fuck is a Dacian?
I'm going to bring all these up and know what they are by next show.
All right.
So I will tell you guys what all these things are.
A map scheme is also a cybernetic unit. Oh my goodness. By the way, cybernetics is not what you normally think of the word. Okay,
Let's talk about it.
Oh yeah, real quick. So when he says it's a cybernetic unit. Cybernetics is not what you think of cybernetics, like that. Not the T1000. Yeah, I know. Well, I understand that. That's fine. Don't give me shit, woman. So it's not.
Water in my ear.
Yeah. Do I have water in my ear? You're giving me guff. Cybernetics is about controls. So whenever whenever you think of cybernetics, if you haven't come in contact with this other what's it called, a definition of cybernetics, like the popular definition of cybernetics and is a cyborg, but they're related. And cybernetics in social sciences and things like that have to do with control of groups. What is it that controls groups? And what is it that leads to these? Because he's talking about that. He's talking about what leads to these agreements. How do we have these?
How do we cooperate?
How did all these systems? Nobody specifically planned out. Okay, we're going to have this set of morality. We're going to do these things. And we're going to
share goals.
Share these goals. We're all going to work according to this plan. Nobody did that. I mean, some people tried to do that with religions and things like that. They tried to redefine it, or they tried to take what was already there and put some sort of specificity to it, and usually putting specificity to it ends horribly. And because it's not complex enough. But that's sort of part of the problems with some religions. Anyway, so this too much specificity. Matter of fact, that's kind of what Jesus said. It's like fuck the law. Anyway, so cybernetics is really kind of about that thing. So it's a word to look into. It's something I only in the past year or two really understood was a different word that had to do with control schemes and shit like that. So anyhow, we'll get to that in the next show, I suppose. But he's getting to the normal science of Kuhn and the cycles of revolution, which I mentioned earlier, are part of an absolute necessity in the development of systems over time.
I am going to see Wiener 1948.
Yeah.
Map schema is also cybernetic unit. See Wiener 1948.
Let's see Wiener 1948.
I will. I'm going to see all of those. The 1924.
Is it Wiener or is it Weiner?
Or
is it Wiener Weiner?
It's Weiner.
Okay.
1924 Weihinger. 1956 Aschenbacher and Aschenbacher.
Thank you, Kitty, for knocking that on the floor.
Oh. Jacine Phenomenal, Bissenwager, 1963, and Boss.
So many names. Oh my god, he just goes crazy with the names.
But
here.
it's all like 35, 24, 56,
Yeah, well,
63,
he's
70.
he's giving us a fuck ton of
Old stuff.
yeah, but he is pulling it together. No, so far I'm very impressed. I am very impressed. I mean,
That's because
I've never seen anybody else talk about the revolution, the cycle of revolution of Kuhn being applicable to anything other than what Kuhn applied it to. And the fact that he brought it up means that he knows that that revolutionary cycle is about complex systems. It's not just about the sociality of science.
Well, the title of the whole thing is The Three Forms of Meaning and the Management of Complexity. And like I said, the reason we're going over this is because I read to you his first sentence, or first paragraph, which is, hey, we put a bunch of arbitrary borders to try to manage complexity, but it's kind of not the right thing to do. Let's talk about it. Yeah. So it seems like something you would like. But yeah, this is, as I was telling somebody on Patreon today, this is the most complex, this is the most academic thing that Jordan Peterson's ever done. Okay? Like, this is not the most, but like this level of stuff is the highest level of technical academic work that this person does. And what most everyone knows him from is the edgy social stuff. And it's like, guys, there's really technical shit there. He's a clinical psychologist professor. Like, he's got some knowledge.
Yeah.
And it's not easy. It's pretty technical. It's pretty academic.
We are kind of slogging through it a little bit.
But it's really interesting to us and to Charles and some of our other patrons. But a lot of other people are like, I have no idea what's going on.
No, I mean this is a tiny neuroscience course. Is what this
it really is actually.
It's like
it is, because this is the first thing you read when you get the Psychology of Meaning book.
Yeah. Well, what he's doing here is he's trying to he's compressing a neuroscience course into a single paper and hitting all the most important topics to pull them together into a singular structure that shows why and how all of these fucking things work together.
Which is why
so it's an excellent fucking. I mean, like I said, I'm kind of blown away at this point that he's done it so well. I had no idea.
Which is why the 2013 textbook on Psychology of Meaning opens with this, because it is a nice little...
It's usually very hard to impress me.
It's true. Well, see, the problem is you had low expectations.
Yeah.
And so if you have low expectations to begin with, then it is... Because we watched one thing of his about IQ, and you're like, turn this off. Fuck this guy.
This guy's a fucking moron.
So
maybe I prejudged him and didn't listen long enough. Because I think what it is he tells things very linearly. I think his mode of communication is extremely linear. He doesn't do, because you have to be thinking about this as opposed to this, and so he's got those things in mind, and he just tells you the one thing, then he tells you the oppositional thing, and the one thing he tells you is so huge that most people will lose context. And so that's why I intersperse things, and though that may be difficult for some people to deal with, difficult to follow, because I intersperse frequently.
But just have patience, it'll all come together. Don't
worry. The point is like I'm trying to build all of the opposing information because you have to be able to integrate the information.
You're going from side to
exactly.
side.
I'm integrating exactly. I'm not doing it linearly. I'm integrating the information as I'm exposing the information, because it's important to integrate it, because if you do the big long one thing and then do another second long one thing, then they don't integrate them. I've seen that that's my experience with religion, is people sit there and take one little part of the Bible and they'll sit there and they talk about things that they call something a chapter that's just a couple fucking, it's just a tiny little thing, and if it's something called a book, that's a chapter in a normal there's what are called books in the Bible should be called chapters. And so it's like, and they never integrate the whole context of the entire thing. They take it one little piece at a time and think of them as completely separate.
All over the place
and so that's why I try to, when I'm communicating to people, it's like, okay, I know you're not going to hold context long enough for me to give this to you in any linear fashion. I've got to give you all the little pieces sewn together.
But as a professor, his students have no choice but to take his shit in a linear fashion and write down their notes and fucking figure it out. That's your job as a student.
And they'll probably never ever get they'll never get how this one huge long thing is related to the next huge long thing, fucking a million years later. Because it's extremely complex. If you're going to understand that stuff, you got to go through all of it.
That's a great weed out.
Yeah.
Wait, though, You know.
It's not good though, because you need to be able to grant people understanding,
Too
because
much gets
because
lost
that's
in
a feedback
the
loop. The more people
cracks.
understand, the more they understand.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah, we're gonna put a kibosh on it right here, and pick up from page 11, 10, 11. One of those pages. So let's see. The actual paper ends on page 20, on page 18. So just okay. So let's say 17, 18. And we are currently on page 10, I think. So it might be a four-parter. I hope it isn't.
Well, I mean,
Well,
we're
it
going to be
kinda
getting
has to be.
No, it probably will be, because he'll be getting to a summary at a certain point. I assume that he'll try to put everything together.
And I read part of his conclusion, and he mentions Gulag Archipelago and all the typical individualist shit, and I'm like, oh, I can't wait until we get to the conclusion, because I bet I'm gonna hate it.
Well, there's certain things that
so far
disagree
it's
with,
great, but
but either way, having a little disagreement is meaningless. He's
yeah,
still,
we're still
he's-
mostly in agreement.
yeah,
in
mostly
every way,
in
yeah.
agreement, and he's.
Well, it's kind of hard to argue with facts, because he's presenting to you how.
Yeah, I couldn't have put this paper together. I mean, I guess I could if I put enough.
If you put enough
it would take
time
me a
into
fucking year to put this fucking paper together.
Right. So, yeah, he does have valuable knowledge, and he is, putting it together in a logical sequence that is, comprehensive. But yeah, it's hard to argue, because he's not really giving his opinions
Yeah.
all that much.
Well, he is occasionally, definitely.
And we disagree with those.
No,
No,
there's certain things that are woven in that are his opinion. The way he is putting things together shows a level of understanding of the information. In other words, he's putting it together. He is weaving it together at a certain level. I'm just trying to weave it together at another level.
At a more layman's level.
Yeah, well, maybe. I guess no, not necessarily. I guess it's just that the period of time in which he learned all of these things means that he can hold the context easier. Okay, yeah, I guess it is. I am putting it together more at a layman's level. That's exactly, you're right. Because here's the thing. Because the level of education that allowed him to write this paper means that he has all this information that I'm saying out loud in between. That's in his head as he's writing the other parts.
And he's not telling
And he'll eventually get to it. But he's putting it in an orderly fashion. So it's like, well, if I put it in anything other than an orderly fashion, you're not going to understand it. And that's the risk that I take.
Right.
That some people probably don't like, but if they can simply conform to my method of communicating, it does weave things together in a certain way that
in a
are
better way.
helpful. Right, that are helpful.
I personally prefer it.
Having both of them at the same time actually is valuable. In other words, the way that he's doing it, which is more linear, is good for some people, and the way that I'm doing it, which is more non-linear, is good for other people. And I think that put the two of them together actually may be the best.
What I like is for that to exist, and then for you to tell me what it means.
Right.
That's my favorite thing.
Yeah, and so his linear methodology of communicating it is based on the fact that he can hold a much longer context,
and he has more information that he's giving.
And if you don't have all this information,
Right.
because you didn't go through a bunch of
Yeah,
you
he
didn't
has
go through a
way
doctorate
more
in
information
fucking
than he's
whatever the
giving.
fuck. You didn't go through all those years of going over the same information over and over and over and over. If you didn't go through all that, you're not going to have that. You can't hold the context because you don't have all these symbols stuck in your head to light up and keep the context as you're going along. It's like, okay, this relates to this, and this relates to this, and this relates to this, and this makes this long pattern that I can pull out. But it's because he is able to, what's the word, mnemonics. He's got mnemonics through his training, and what I'm doing is attempting to create mnemonics live as we're going over the information, and by weaving it all together into its own emergent mnemonic.
See, I'm thinking actually it was more of a slog because it was so technical, and we did have to interpret some of it, both for my sake sometimes and for our audience's sake. However, now I'm seeing I'm pretty sure that's a Young reference right there, in the same paragraph.
Yeah.
So I think it's actually going to go faster now, because I think we're talking about more metaphysical concepts that are, that don't require so much explanation.
Yeah,
per se,
perhaps. I hate that use of the word of metaphysics, though.
Oh, why?
Because metaphysics should be
about physics. Oh, okay. So supraphysical.
Because whenever people use the term metaphysics as a pejorative, that's what they mean. It's like it's more like opinion and stuff like that.
No, I just meant like it's meta information, meta theory.
Meta theory, that's fine.
Okay,
Just not
cool.
metaphysics.
Yeah,
right?
meta theory. There you go. That's the word.
Yes, exactly. So it's the theory about the theory. Oh, he talks. There's Pribram also.
Nice.
I wonder if he's starting to talk about Bowman Pribram because here's the thing. Earlier, by the way, I got hints that he actually believes in the Bowman Pribram.
Holonomic brain theory.
Exactly. Because the way he talked about the way the information is structured sounded like I didn't mention it, but it sounded like he was referring to holographic storage of information. In other words, because that is absolutely.
And of course, arbitrary borders would go along with that.
Right, and so he may actually also be in the same opinion as me when it comes to Bowman Pribram and the here's the thing, the holographic versus holonomic.
Sorry,
there's some
holonomic brain.
there's actually slight differences, and
I said it wrong.
Yeah, except I can't really discuss what the differences are very well because it's kind of weird because I actually believe that the brain is based on holography. In other words, it is specifically because holonomy is a very technical topic that I don't know is really as applicable. I dislike the idea of trying to use the term holonomy when it comes to the holographic brain theory, which is actually they call the holonomic brain theory.
Right.
So it's like I think it has to do with terminology, unfortunately. So anyway, all that aside, they're basically the same, and even though some people will argue that they're different, they're in general the same. So when you say holonomic brain theory, it is relating to the holographic storage and organization of information and the way that overlaps. So anyway, yeah, he's almost certainly part of the same school of thought when it comes to that, because like I said, something he was saying very directly to me
indicated,
and I didn't mention it because it's like, okay, I can't go down that bunny trail right now.
Yeah, no,
but
it's not going to mean anything to anyone else.
It's not going to mean anything to anyone unless he gets into it further. But it keyed me off as like, oh, maybe he actually knows that too, because it follows. I mean, when you don't take out individual memories by damage to the brain, you take out parts. You take out some resolution. So a given memory in a single place is not the way the brain works, and that's the way that computers work. That's not the way the brain works. And it's only because of holographic principles that the fact that the information is stored across a much wider area that is that the reason why you can damage your brain and not damage a single memory and take out a single memory. So anyhow, that's some exciting insights that he might be very, very closely. The whole reason I'm liking is because he because he agrees with me. It's terrible, isn't it?
It's the worst.
It's so bad.
Well, I feel like you have a bit of a pass on that because I know you to be uniquely invested in matching your opinion with the truth as it is most cutting edge available at any given time.
Yep.
So you get a pass in my book. All right. Yeah. That was it for now. We will be back. I love that we had.
I'm trying to read something. You switched it 40 times.
I have to give you a context.
Okay, go ahead.
As I'm sorry. I love how we've been talking. We're discussing Jordan Peterson's paper for about close to 8 hours now, and on the 11th hour, 59th minute, someone comes in saying he's full of crap. It made me laugh pretty hard on the inside.
Well, but hey, from a short take, I also said the same thing. It's like
that's true
because I didn't get I did not get enough information from all I got was a little talk about. He started talking about IQ
and its value, and we're like,
and I think what it is because that's what my point was.
Because he's linear.
He communicates a huge bunch of stuff before he gets to the subtleties of it.
Yeah.
And so it's like
I didn't wait for
exactly. I didn't listen to him long enough, and he just gave this simple the rule and didn't talk about any of the exceptions. And I'm like, well, fuck you. You think there's just the rule and no goddamn exceptions? You're an idiot.
Yeah.
And so I think I didn't listen to him long enough.
That happens. We should all try to be more patient in such ways. Me most especially.
I think he just has a particular communication style, which has its value.
Yeah. And I think it works in his, being a professor. He probably, gets away with it a little more because, students are sort of a captive audience in a way.
Yeah. Well, his communication style is good for people who can integrate the information themselves.
It is a
people
more
who can hold a long context,
professional style.
And if you're teaching somebody over the long
it's
term,
just an
and teaching them
academic.
repeatedly.
Yeah.
Theoretically, they should eventually be able to weave that information together, even though it's not so closely. Basically, it's not the information isn't so closely overlapping and integrated. Which is what I'm attempting to do as we're discussing.
Yeah, which is valuable. All right. I think that is it for us for today, and we will be back with more of this goodness on next Monday. And ideally, hopefully, either Monday of the 7th or the Monday of the 14th, we will be done with this paper. And then we'll find some nice fun news for you guys, and then we'll dive into quantum the computing and fun stuff like that. So there's definitely a show for everyone here on CherrySTEM. Now, let us have a song play us out as soon as I catch up with chat. It's true sometimes. And I mean, it's like whenever you have a general rule of what to do, there will be exceptions that, slip through the cracks. And, it just so happened to be this was one of those. But yeah, that's a valid point, Charles. It doesn't diminish the value of having to have a pretty draconian cutoff point with the limited time and infinite content out there. And particularly on top of some, information about a person being more of like an edgelord perhaps and things like that. And so, you do draw assumptions and stereotype people, which is yet another way in which we develop triggers to cut off, or filters to cut off, useless information. And I think we talk about that a lot, where some people are all noise and signal, of course. If they pay attention to everything, they get the noise and the signal. And then there's those who, have a very strong filter and cutoff point for noise, and they get pure signal, but sometimes they end up certainly missing things. Charles was just saying that it's, to be fair, you can't, that is the danger that we're talking about, where you can't possibly read everything in full, and so you do need to have a cutoff point or a filter that. And sometimes if it's too hairline, if it's too thin, if it's too abrupt, then you're gonna miss stuff. But yeah,
I don't follow.
It's just you were talking about how we didn't listen to.
Is this the after show or
no?
Oh, okay, we're still.
Yeah, it's just you said that you didn't listen to Jordan Peterson enough to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I was saying it's a danger because you can't possibly read everything in full. You need a hair trigger filter for this is worthwhile that leads to lots of false negatives.
Yep, it's true. It's like you, and that's actually one of the biggest problems I face a lot of times, is the moment I say anything is wrong with relativity, and they're, you're just another crackpot, and you don't understand what you're talking about, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, I know it far better than you do, and you just have to be able to listen to me long enough. And of course, I don't blame you when you immediately say you're just another crackpot, because I know there are a bunch of crackpots who absolutely have no fucking clue what they're talking about.
And you wish they didn't talk.
It's like, please, I wish they would all shut up. It's like, just shut up. You're stupid. But it's like, don't be on my side, please don't be on my side. But no, I mean, so no, I get it, because you can't examine everything, and you have to make snap judgments, because you have only a limited period of time to be able to examine the information. So you have to be able to justify whether or not this is valuable and worth my time, and all of the what you have to put into it to actually get to the point at which you find out all the subtleties of an argument. For instance, if I say something about relativity, immediately, people are going to they're not going to know it's something very, very, very fucking subtle, and that it's, very little changes.
Very nuanced, very complex.
Extremely nuanced. It goes, back 200 years of history and all of these various points. And, being able to get them to that point is a near impossibility a lot of times. I can't even get them. There's a guy who he actually used to be a former head of the National Science Foundation, who just now is starting to get to the point where he understands what I'm talking about after talking to him for like a year, because I could tell what it is the moment I start talking, it's like, oh yeah, it's more of that crap that I don't, and then what you do is you just turn your brain off when you don't want to listen. You start skimming, and you'll actually just turn your brain off when you think that what you're about to hear is a waste of your cognitive ability. You just go off somewhere else. And then a lot of times you'll make that snap decision, and I'll say that I almost certainly made that snap decision with Jordan Peterson. You'll make that snap decision, and it's really kind of unavoidable. You can't really avoid that because you have to be able to limit your time, because there is a tremendous amount of nonsense out there.
Yet another, in my view, that's yet another point for iteration. I was talking to patrons in the Bath show. It's cycles, man. It's all about cycles. You got to go over things. Gotta go through them over and over. Gotta do the loop.
Basic principle of reality.
Yep. Yep.
All right. So, is there anything else we need to cover before we?
I think that's it. It's 8:00. I opened the floor up for questions.
Oh, okay. We're doing questions. Cool.
Yep. And I believe that is it. That was the last of questions and comments and all of that. So I have addressed everything, and we are now going to have a little song, sing us out, and be done with the stream. And we will see you all next Monday. Of course, some of you will see before then. But yes, good night, everybody. Thank you for listening for as long as you could. And
for as long as you could take it.
And we will see you next Monday. Thanks again. Bye.